The Cursed Tree. This is a true story. My name is Miguel Hernandez, and I'm recording this on October 31st, 2024 at exactly 11:47 p.m. What I'm about to tell you happened 20 years ago on my family's ranch in northern Chihuahua, Mexico. 7 men died in 2 months. My father was the eighth, and the thing that killed them, it's still there, still waiting. And 3 days ago, it started calling to me again. By the end of this story, you'll understand why I can never leave this property, why I sleep with every light in the house turned on, and why, despite everything I know, I'm starting to feel the urge to walk back into those woods. Right now, as I speak, I can smell it. That sweet, rotten smell that only comes when she's near, like flowers blooming on a corpse. The temperature in this room has dropped 15 degrees in the last 5 minutes. And if you listen closely, you can hear her laughing. A soft, distant sound that seems to come from inside the walls themselves. I'm Miguel Hernandez. I'm 32 years old now, but the story I'm about to tell happened when I was 12. It was the summer of 2004, and I was living a life most American boys could only dream of: 300 hectares of open land in Chihuahua, Mexico, with horses, cattle, and the freedom to run wild from dawn until dusk. We had mountains on one side, endless desert on the other, and a creek that ran year-round despite the drought that plagued the region. But there was one problem, one fundamental flaw in what should have been an idyllic childhood. I was afraid of the dark, not normal kid afraid, not the kind of fear you outgrow after a few nightmares. I'm talking about the kind of fear that paralyzes you, the kind that meant I couldn't sleep unless light from the hallway spilled into my room, creating a barrier against whatever lurked in the shadows. The kind of fear that made me check under the bed 3 times every night, that made me run from the barn to the house before sunset, that made the other ranch kids whisper that I was soft, that I'd never be a real man. My mother had died when I was 8. She passed away at night in her bedroom, and I was the first person to find her the next morning. I'd woken early, heard strange silence in the house, no coffee brewing, no radio playing, no sound of her moving through the kitchen preparing breakfast as she did every morning without fail. I found her lying in bed, eyes open, staring at nothing. Her hand was reaching toward the door, fingers extended as if she'd been trying to call for help in her final moments, but couldn't quite make it. The doctor said it was a heart attack, sudden and massive. She probably didn't suffer much, they told me. But those open eyes told a different story. They looked terrified. Since then, nighttime never felt safe again. Every shadow became a threat. Every creak of the house settling became footsteps. Every gust of wind against the windows became someone or something trying to get in. My father, Don Rodrigo, tried to understand. He really did. But he was a man of the old generation, born in 1954, raised by a father who'd survived the revolution, someone who believed men conquered fear through willpower alone, through sheer, stubborn refusal to acknowledge weakness. So he let me keep the lights on. Never mentioned it in front of the ranch hands. But I saw the way he looked at me sometimes, disappointment flickering across his weathered, sun-darkened face. I saw him wince when I refused to go out after dark, when I made excuses to avoid the evening chores that required me to cross the dark yard to the barn. He never said I was a coward, but I could see him thinking it. Rancho Los Álamos sat 20 miles from the nearest town, a dusty place called San Miguel de los Santos, population maybe 800 if you counted the dogs. No neighbors within shouting distance, no streetlights, no ambient glow from distant cities. Cell phone signal so weak it was essentially decorative. You had to drive 5 miles toward town before you could make a call. At night, the only lights were the main house and 2 or 3 workers' cabins scattered across the property like lonely stars in an ocean of darkness. Beyond that, just darkness. Miles and miles of darkness pressing against our little islands of light, waiting patiently for the generator to fail or the bulbs to burn out. And the forest. Always the forest, watching from the north like a patient predator. Rancho Los Álamos, my father named this place after the ancient cottonwood trees lining the creek running through the eastern section of the property. It was beautiful land during the day, the kind of beauty that made photographers drive out from the city just to capture it. Golden grasslands stretched to the foothills, dotted with mesquite trees and stands of prickly pear cactus that bloomed brilliant pink in spring. The sky hung so vast and blue you could see the curve of the earth at the horizon, could watch storms building 50 miles away and track their progress hour by hour. We had good water from the creek fed by springs up in the mountains, good grazing for the cattle, rich soil in the bottomlands where we grew corn and beans. It was honest land that rewarded honest work, my father used to say, land that a man could build a legacy on. But at night it transformed into something else entirely. The air became heavy, humid, even though we were in the Chihuahuan desert where humidity shouldn't exist. The change usually started around sunset. You'd feel it settling over the ranch like a wet blanket, making it hard to breathe, making sweat stick to your skin despite the cooling temperature. You could smell it on those nights, wet earth. Something old and musty that didn't belong in this climate. A scent that reminded me of the time we found a dead cow that had fallen into a ravine and lain there for a week before we discovered it. Coyotes would howl from the hills in their usual chorus, yipping and calling to each other as they hunted rabbits and mice through the grassland. But sometimes you'd hear something answer from the forest. Something that made the coyotes go silent mid-howl, made them slink away with their tails between their legs. A sound that was almost a howl, but not quite like someone who'd heard coyotes but didn't quite understand how they should sound. The forest began about half a mile north of the house. It wasn't typical for this region, not the sparse, drought-adapted trees you'd expect in northern Chihuahua. This was something denser, older, wrong. Twisted oak trees with bark so dark it looked charred, as if a fire had swept through decades ago and left the trees permanently blackened. Undergrowth so thick it formed impenetrable walls of thorny bushes and vine-like plants I couldn't identify. And a canopy so dense that even at noon, when the desert sun beat down mercilessly at 105 degrees on the grassland, the forest interior remained in perpetual twilight, cool and dim and somehow threatening. I remember the sounds with crystal clarity. Even now, 20 years later, whine through those leaves didn't sound natural. It carried a quality that made you think of voices, not words exactly, but the rhythm and cadence of speech, like listening to a conversation in a language you almost recognize, but can't quite understand. As if the forest was holding conversations with itself in a tongue that predated human language, that bypassed the conscious mind, and spoke directly to that ancient part of the brain that still remembered when humans were prey. I remember the temperature with the same clarity even on summer days, when the thermometer hit 105 degrees and you could see heat shimmer rising from the rocks. The air near the forest edge felt 10 degrees cooler. But it wasn't refreshing coolness, wasn't the pleasant shade you sought during the brutal afternoon heat. It was the chill of walking past a meat locker, of standing too close to something that consumed heat rather than reflected it, that pulled warmth from the air and gave back only cold. And I remember the feeling most of all every time I looked toward those trees, whether from my bedroom window in the morning or while working in the south pasture during the day, or especially in the evening as shadows lengthened across the grassland. My hind brain screamed warnings. That ancient part of the mind that kept our ancestors alive on the African savanna, that knew instinctively what was predator and what was prey, that could sense danger before the conscious mind registered it. That part of me screamed that something was looking back, not from the edge where sunlight still penetrated, from deep inside where the shadows were thickest, where the canopy blocked out the sky completely. Watching, cataloging, waiting for the right moment, the right weakness, the right opportunity. My father bought this property in 1995 for a suspiciously cheap price, suspiciously cheap even for rural Mexican land in the mid-90s. 300 hectares of prime grazing land with year-round water, good access to the highway, and a solid house with outbuildings should have cost twice what he paid. But the previous owner, a widow named Senora Valdez, wanted to sell it quickly, desperately even. She was in her 70s when my father met her to sign the papers, rail-thin, with skin like brown leather from decades under the desert sun, with eyes that had seen too much and now looked at everything with a mixture of exhaustion and wariness. Her hands trembled as she signed the deed, and my father later told me he'd thought it was just age. He didn't realize it was fear. "This land has history," she told my father during the sale, sitting across from him in the lawyer's office in town, her voice barely above a whisper. "Bad history that goes back further than you might think, further than the Spanish, further than anyone remembers." My father, ever practical, smiled politely the way you do when an old person starts rambling. "All land has history, Senora. That's what makes it valuable, all those years of families working it, building on it, making it productive. Not this kind of history." Her gnarled fingers, twisted with arthritis, traced the property line on the map spread between them, stopping at the northern section where the forest lay marked in dark green. "Especially not here, the forest. You must promise me something, Senor Hernandez. You must swear on your mother's grave." That got his attention. Oaths on dead mothers were serious business in our culture. "Of course, Senora. What is it?" "Never disturb the northern forest. Never cut trees there. Never let your workers go deep inside. Never dig there. Never build there. Never clear land there. And especially," her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, forcing him to lean forward to hear, "never go to the center of it. There's a tree there." Different from the others. Older, wrong. It doesn't belong to this world. Didn't grow from any seed that should exist. Promise me you'll leave it alone. Promise me you'll leave her alone." My father promised. Why wouldn't he? It was just words to seal a deal, just an old woman's superstition. The forest was worthless anyway. Too dense for grazing the wood, too twisted for lumber, the ground too rocky and uneven for cultivation. He had no intention of going near it. That promise lasted 9 years. Everything started with the dogs on the morning of June 16th, 2004. A Wednesday, I remember because it was the day before I was supposed to go to my friend Ricardo's house in town for his birthday party, and I was excited about it, about getting away from the ranch for a day, about spending time with kids my own age who didn't know about my fear of the dark. We had 3 guard dogs, German shepherds named Lobo, Reina, and Oso, Bear Queen and Wolf. Large, fierce animals we'd raised from puppies, trained specifically to protect livestock from coyotes, mountain lions, and the occasional opportunistic thief who thought an isolated ranch would be an easy target. These dogs feared nothing. I'd seen Lobo chase off a full-grown cougar without hesitation, teeth bared, willing to die to protect his territory. I'd seen Reina face down 3 coyotes at once and send them running. I'd seen Oso bark so ferociously at a would-be burglar that the man literally wet himself and ran. But that morning, all 3 were found outside the front door, pressed against it so hard they'd left scratch marks on the wood, trembling so violently their metal tags rattled like castanets. The fur along their spines stood straight up, hackles raised in permanent alarm. And they kept staring toward the forest, not barking aggressively, but growling continuously. Not the growls of animals ready to attack, but the whimpering, terrified growls of animals who'd seen something that broke their understanding of the world, that violated every instinct that told them what was possible and what wasn't. "What's wrong with them?" I asked my father at breakfast, looking out the kitchen window at the dogs. They hadn't moved from the door, hadn't eaten the food we'd put out, just stayed there, shaking, staring north. My father frowned, setting down his coffee cup with a troubled expression. "Sebastian," he called to our foreman, who was finishing his breakfast at the other end of the table. "Take Diego and Mateo. Ride the northern perimeter. Check for predator signs, track scat carcasses. Whatever spooked the dogs, I want to know what it is." Sebastian, our foreman, a 60-year-old man with a magnificent silver mustache that he waxed every morning, with eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled and hands gnarled from 40 years of ranch work, nodded slowly. But I saw concern in his face. saw the way he glanced toward the forest before standing up. They saddled horses and rode out. I watched from my bedroom window as they headed north, three figures growing smaller against the golden grassland, eventually disappearing into the heat shimmer. They returned an hour later, and even from a distance I could see something was wrong. They rode faster than they'd left, their postures tense, and when they dismounted in the yard, they didn't do the usual joking and small talk, just tied the horses quickly and hurried inside to report. "No tracks, patron," Sebastian said, shaking his head. "No scat, no carcasses, no sign of predators at all, not even rabbit kills or mouse bones. It's like every animal has abandoned that whole section." "Probably just spooked by something we haven't found yet," my father said, but I heard the uncertainty in his voice. Maybe a bear passed through during the night. But Sebastian wasn't finished. "The horses wouldn't go past the creek, patron. Reyna, you know Reyna, she's the bravest horse we have. I've ridden her through lightning storms without her spooking. She stopped at the creek and wouldn't cross, started backing up showing whites of eyes. Same with the others, and not just the horses. When we got near the forest edge, we could hear it." "Hear what?" "Nothing. Absolute silence. No birds, no insects, no rustling in the undergrowth, like everything living had fled and left it empty." Sebastian's weathered face looked troubled. "And the cattle, all 200 head, have clustered in the south pasture, even though there's better grass up north. They won't go near it either." My father was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window toward the distant tree line. "Animals sense storms sometimes," he finally said, checking the cloudless sky. "Maybe bad weather's coming from the mountains." But no storm came. The sky remained clear and blue. And that night, the light started. At exactly 9:47 p.m., I remember checking the clock because I couldn't sleep, because that feeling of being watched had intensified until I felt like my skin was crawling. The lights in the horse barn began flickering. Not the normal random power fluctuations we sometimes got when the generator struggled. These flickered in a deliberate, unmistakable pattern. 3 quick flashes, pause, 3 slow flashes, pause, 3 quick flashes. Over and over and over. I was standing at my bedroom window looking out at the barn because I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that something had changed in the fundamental nature of the ranch. And I watched those lights pulse their message into the darkness. 3 quick, 3 slow, 3 quick. SOS. The international distress signal. Something was calling for help, or something was mocking the idea of help. "Papa," I called downstairs, my voice cracking with fear. "Something's wrong with the barn lights." He came up the stairs 2 at a time, Sebastian right behind him. They stood beside me at the window and we watched together as the pattern repeated. 3 quick, 3 slow, 3 quick. Over and over, mechanical and relentless. My father's jaw tightened. I saw his hands clench into fists. "Just electrical issues," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "The wiring in that barn is old, probably just a short somewhere. I'll call an electrician first thing tomorrow." But we all knew it wasn't a short. Shorts don't create patterns. Shorts don't spell out SOS over and over like something was playing with us. The electrician arrived the next afternoon, a practical man named Ernesto, who'd wired half the houses in the county, who'd been doing electrical work for 30 years and prided himself on being able to diagnose any problem within minutes. He spent 3 hours checking every connection, testing voltage at every junction, examining the breaker box with the thoroughness of a surgeon, even climbing up into the rafters to check the main line coming from the generator. "System's perfect, Don Rodrigo," Ernesto said as he packed his tools, looking genuinely puzzled. "No shorts, no loose connections, no voltage problems, no signs of rodent damage to the wiring. The system is functioning exactly as it should. Better than it should, honestly. Whoever installed this did quality work. No reason for those lights to flicker, no reason at all." "But they did," my father insisted. "My son and I both saw it. Clear pattern, not random." Ernesto shrugged uncomfortably, avoiding my father's eyes. Maybe you saw heat shimmer desert plays tricks on the eyes at night, especially when you're tired. Or maybe ball lightning, I've heard of that causing strange effects. But there was no lightning, no storms, no tricks of heat shimmer, just those lights pulsing their message. That night at exactly 9:47 p.m. again, same time, to the minute the lights began their SOS pattern once more. We all stood in the yard watching it, my father, Sebastian, and me. 3 quick, 3 slow, 3 quick, mechanical, relentless, mocking. Whatever's causing that, Sebastian said quietly, it's not electrical. The following week brought the doors, and that's when things escalated from unsettling to impossible. Every morning we'd find the barn door standing open, not broken, not forced, not even unlocked in any conventional sense, just open. The deadbolt remained engaged, thrown into the locked position. The padlock remained closed and locked. But the door itself stood wide open as if the solid wood had simply passed through the solid metal like a ghost passing through a wall. "Someone's playing games," my father declared after the third morning of finding the door open despite it being secured the night before. "Diego, Mateo, you two take turns watching the barn at night, 4-hour shifts. I want to know who's doing this." But even with 2 men stationed outside armed with flashlights and machetes watching all night without sleeping rotating shifts every 4 hours, the door still opened. And the watchers swore nothing approached. No sound, no movement, no shadows, no footsteps. They'd blink, and when they looked back, the door that had been closed was simply open, as if reality itself had briefly stuttered, skipped a frame, and when it resumed, the world had changed. "It's the wind," Diego offered weakly after his shift, though there was no wind. The night had been dead calm, not even a breeze to stir the leaves. "Hinges must be loose," Mateo suggested, though he'd personally checked them and found them not just tight but new. My father had replaced them only a month ago. "Maybe the wood is warped," someone else said. "Heat expansion during the day, contraction at night." But we all knew these were lies we told ourselves to avoid facing the truth. Something was opening that door. Something that didn't care about locks or bolts or solid matter. Something that wanted us to know it could come and go as it pleased. Nobody believed the explanations anymore. You could see it in their faces, the way their eyes kept drifting toward the forest during the day, the way they found reasons to work in pairs instead of alone, the way conversations died mid-sentence when anyone mentioned the strange occurrences. Fear was spreading through the ranch like a disease, and we had no medicine for it. Something had changed on the ranch. Some invisible line had been crossed, some ancient contract violated. And whatever had been sleeping was beginning to wake up. And then on the night of June 23, 2004, at exactly 10:15 p.m., I saw it. I was in my room, lights blazing as always, the overhead light, my reading lamp, even the flashlight on my nightstand pointed at the ceiling to add more illumination. I'd surrounded myself with light like armor, like a fortress against the dark. I was trying to read a comic book, something mindless about superheroes, trying to distract myself from the oppressive feeling that had been growing all week. But concentration was impossible. That feeling of being watched, of malevolent attention focused directly on me, had grown stronger every night until it felt like physical pressure on my skin, like invisible hands pushing against me, testing my defenses. My skin crawled with it. Every hair on my body stood up as if electrically charged. My heart hammered in my chest. My breathing came short and shallow. The lizard brain, that ancient survival mechanism, screamed at me that I was in immediate danger, that a predator was close, that I needed to run or fight or hide. I told myself it was paranoia, imagination, anxiety triggered by my mother's death years ago, amplified by the strange events on the ranch. Just my mind playing tricks, creating threats where none existed, because I was still that scared 8-year-old boy who'd found his mother dead and had never recovered. But the feeling intensified, became unbearable, like standing too close to a fire and feeling heat on your skin, knowing you should move but frozen in place by some instinct you don't understand. My window faced north, toward the forest, toward whatever was out there in the darkness. Don't look, I told myself, gripping my comic book so hard the pages crumpled. Just keep reading. It's nothing. Just anxiety, just fear. There's nothing at the window because you're on the second floor and there's no ladder and nothing could climb up here. But the sensation grew until it felt like someone was pressing their face against the glass outside their breath, fogging the window even though I was 15 feet away on my bed. I could feel their eyes boring into the back of my head with such intensity it was almost painful, like being burned by invisible lasers. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to know, had to see that there was nothing there, that my mind was just creating phantoms. I turned my head, and I saw it, a face pressed against the window, looking directly at me with intelligent, focused malevolence. Not human. The proportions were catastrophically wrong. The skull was too elongated, stretching back too far like something that had been put in a vise and crushed. The skin was gray, not pale white like sickness, but true gray like ash or concrete or old meat left in a freezer too long. Stretched so tight over the bone structure that I could see every contour of the skull beneath every angle and ridge and hollow. The eyes were too large for any human face, taking up a third of the visible area, and they were solid black from corner to corner. No whites, no iris, no pupil, just complete and absolute darkness. But they weren't dead or empty. Something moved in that darkness, something that writhed and squirmed like looking into a pool of black water filled with leeches. And the mouth, God, the mouth. It hung open impossibly wide, the jaw dislocated or broken, or simply not subject to human limitations, stretched so far that I could see deep into the throat. And inside was nothing but more darkness, that same squirming, living darkness that filled the eyes. No tongue, no teeth, no uvula. Just an entrance to something that went down and down forever into places that shouldn't exist. The face tilted slightly like a dog cocking its head to study something interesting. And I realized it was curious about me, examining me, cataloging me, choosing me. I screamed loud enough that my voice cracked, loud enough that I tasted blood in my throat, screamed until my lungs burned and my vision went gray at the edges. My father burst through the door, Sebastian right behind him, both of them wild-eyed and gasping. "What is it? What is it?" my father shouted, grabbing my shoulders. "There," I pointed at the window with a shaking hand. "There was a face at the window looking at me." My father ran to the window, Sebastian moving to the other side. They both looked out into the darkness. Nothing, just the empty night, the distant stars, the sound of crickets resuming their song after my screaming had startled them into silence. "Miguel, there's nothing there," my father said, but his voice was gentle, concerned. "Nothing at all." It was there, I saw it, gray face, black eyes, mouth open too wide. It was looking right at me. "You had a nightmare, mijo," he said, pulling me into a hug. "A bad dream, that's all, just a dream." "I wasn't asleep," I insisted, my body shaking. "I was reading, I was awake." Sebastian was already heading downstairs. I heard the front door open, heard his boots on the porch, then on the ground as he circled the house. He came back 5 minutes later, and I saw his face was pale in the lamplight. "Patron," he said quietly, "you need to see this." We followed him outside, around to below my window. Sebastian's flashlight beam illuminated the ground. Handprints, 4 of them, pressed deep into the soil that we'd watered that afternoon, leaving perfect impressions. But they weren't human handprints. The palms were roughly the right size, but the fingers were catastrophically wrong. Each one extended at least 8 inches from the palm, thin as pencils, with clear impressions at the tips where something sharp had pressed into the earth. Not fingernails, claws. Curve-pointed claws like a bird of prey. 4 handprints, leading from the direction of the forest, stopping at the wall directly below my second-story window, 15 feet up with nothing to climb on. No ladder, no trellis, no handholds in the smooth adobe. Then returning to the forest. Whatever had made these prints had climbed straight up a vertical wall. We stood there in silence, three males staring at impossible evidence that the world worked differently than we'd been taught. My father's face had gone from concerned to horrified to carefully blank as he processed what he was seeing. Sebastian made the sign of the cross, slowly, lips moving in what might have been prayer. "Bear," my father finally said, his voice hollow and unconvincing even to himself. "Must be a bear. They can climb. Everyone knows bears can climb." "Bears don't have fingers like that, patron," Sebastian said quietly, never taking his eyes from the prints. "Bears have 5 claws, not 4 fingers and a thumb, and bears don't climb smooth walls. They need texture, something to grip." "Then what?" My father's voice rose, angry now, the anger of someone whose worldview is cracking apart, who's being forced to consider possibilities he's spent his whole life denying. "What do you think it is, Sebastian? What could possibly make prints like that?" Sebastian looked toward the forest, barely visible as a dark mess against the star-filled sky. "Something we should leave alone, patron. Something that was sleeping and now isn't. You're talking about superstition, old wives' tales. There are no monsters, Sebastian, no ghosts, no demons, just animals we don't understand yet." "Yes, patron." But Sebastian's tone said he didn't believe a word of it. We went back inside. My father sat with me until I finally fell asleep from sheer exhaustion as dawn began to lighten the sky. But I heard him in the hallway afterward talking quietly with Sebastian. "Get me a camera. Document those prints before the sun erases them. And nobody talks about this. Not to the other men, not to anyone in town. Understood?" "Yes, patron. But what if—" "There's no what if. It's an animal. Unknown species maybe, but still just an animal. And animals can be dealt with, can be trapped or shot or driven off. We just need to identify it." But we couldn't leave it alone. Because 2 days later, on June 28, 2004, at 1:30 in the afternoon, broad daylight, hot sun, no shadows to hide, and Diego and Mateo found the tree. A calf had wandered off that morning, a stupid yearling, following its curiosity deeper into the ranch than the herd usually grazed. Diego and Mateo had tracked it by its cries, following the sound north and east, closer to the forest than they typically went. The path was barely visible, overgrown with thorny brush, as if the forest actively discouraged anyone from using it. They found the calf standing in a clearing unharmed, just standing there, absolutely still, staring at something ahead of it with the glassy-eyed fascination of a bird hypnotized by a snake. When Diego and Mateo returned at dusk, riding slowly, their faces had changed. Eyes too wide, pupils dilated despite the fading light. Skin gone waxy and pale under their tans. Moving with the mechanical stiffness of people in shock, going through motions without really being present. "Patron," Diego said when my father met them in the yard, his voice trembling and distant. "We found something in the forest, near the center, a tree. You have to—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "You have to see it to understand. I can't describe it. Words aren't enough." "What kind of tree?" my father asked, already frowning. There was something in Diego's voice that raised alarm, something beyond simple surprise or curiosity. "Not like the others. Not like any tree anywhere." Diego's eyes were unfocused, looking at something we couldn't see, something in his memory. "It's wrong. Everything about it is wrong, but beautiful. The most beautiful and terrifying thing I've ever seen in my entire life." Mateo nodded slowly, still gripping his saddle horn, though he'd already dismounted. "It calls to you, not with sound, but you feel it. Like gravity pulling you forward, like standing at the edge of a cliff and feeling the urge to jump. You want to get closer, need to get closer, want to touch it to understand it, to—" He stopped, looking confused and frightened. "To become part of it." My father's frown deepened. "Sebastian, take them inside. Get them water, make sure they didn't get heat stroke." But it wasn't heat stroke. It was something far worse. Within 24 hours, every worker on the ranch was talking about the tree. They couldn't stop. It dominated every conversation, invaded every thought, filled every silence. The men who'd seen it, Diego and Mateo, described it obsessively, repeating the same details over and over, as if trying to convince themselves it was real. The bark is black, not dark brown, not gray, black like obsidian, like volcanic glass, like it absorbs light instead of reflecting it. The leaves don't move. Doesn't matter how hard the wind blows, and there was wind, I felt it on my face. Those leaves hang absolutely still, like they're painted on, like they're not real leaves at all. Nothing grows around it. Perfect circle of dead earth, maybe 50 feet across, just dirt. Brown cracked dirt, like someone poured poison on the ground. And the size, the trunk must be 10, 12 feet across, 50, 60 feet tall. How could something that big grow in that dense forest without anyone knowing, without anyone seeing it before? But the strangest part, the part that made my father's expression grow darker and more troubled with each telling, was what they all felt when they saw it. "It pulls you," Mateo said during dinner that night, staring at his untouched plate. "Like you're metal and it's a magnet, you feel it in your chest and your bones. An urge almost impossible to resist to walk up to it, to place your hands on that black bark, to press your face against it, to become part of it." Diego had to hold me back, another worker who'd gone to see it admitted. I was walking toward it without realizing, like sleepwalking. He grabbed my arm and I fought him, actually fought him, because I needed to touch it, needed it more than air. My father stood abruptly from the dinner table chair, scraping loudly on the floor. The room went silent. Effective immediately, no one goes into that forest. That's not a suggestion, that's an order. No one. Not for lost cattle, not for firewood, not for any reason. Anyone who disobeys will be fired immediately. Do you all understand? The men nodded, mumbled agreement, but I saw it in their eyes, that distant, hungry look. The look of addicts thinking about their next fix. The look of people already planning to break the rules because they couldn't help themselves. The order came too late. The seed had been planted, and in 2 days someone would water it with blood. 2 days later, at exactly 9:47 p.m. on June 30th, always that time I'd noticed like something was marking the hours until a deadline, Alejandro went to the forest. He was our youngest worker, only 23 years old. Sweet kid with an easy smile and terrible jokes, always the first to volunteer for hard jobs, always staying late to help others finish their work. He'd gotten married just 6 months ago to Maria, a pretty girl from town with long black hair and a shy laugh. They had a baby daughter named Isabella, who was barely 3 months old, still tiny and perfect, and completely dependent. He lived in the small cabin closest to the forest. And that night, the pull became too strong to resist. We heard his screaming at 9:47 p.m. Not the scream of someone startled or hurt, the scream of absolute existential terror. The scream of someone whose mind is breaking in real time, who's seeing something that shouldn't exist, that violates every rule of reality they've built their sanity on. Everyone ran toward the sound. My father grabbed his rifle. Sebastian grabbed a machete. I followed, despite my father yelling at me to stay in the house, to lock the door, to hide in my room. But I couldn't. I had to see, had to know what was happening. It took 15 minutes to find him in the darkness, even with flashlights and lanterns, even though we were following the sound of his screams. The forest seemed to twist around us, paths appearing and disappearing, familiar landmarks vanishing, as if the forest itself was actively interfering with our search. We found him kneeling at the base of the tree, in that clearing Diego and Mateo had described. And they were right. Words weren't enough. Words could never be enough. The tree was massive, dominating the clearing like a cathedral spire, like something that existed on a different scale than normal reality. The trunk was easily 12 feet across, twisted into a spiral like a candy cane or a barber pole, the bark spiraling upward in a pattern that hurt to look at, that made your eyes water and your head ache as you tried to follow the spiral to the top. The bark was black. Not just dark, absolute black, like staring into a hole in reality, like looking into deep space where no stars shone. but it had a faint luminescence underneath a sickly glow like foxfire, or bioluminescence like something rotting in deep ocean trenches where sunlight never reached. The leaves were nearly as black as the bark, hundreds of them, but not a single one moved, despite a breeze strong enough that I felt it on my face. They hung perfectly still, as if carved from obsidian and welded to the branches. And the roots, God, the roots! They writhed above ground in a perfect circle around the trunk, each one thick as my torso, coiling and uncoiling in a slow, rhythmic motion that looked disturbingly like breathing. Like the tree was a living thing, drawing breath, its chest rising and falling, its lungs filling and emptying. But none of that was what made us freeze in horror. It was Alejandro, and what was happening to him. He knelt at the tree's base, hands clutching a broken branch about 3 feet long, his fingers white-knuckled around the black wood. His eyes were open but unseeing, staring at nothing, or perhaps at something only he could see. His mouth hung open in a silent scream, and his arms were covered in black veins, not normal veins. These were thick, raised, looking almost like roots growing beneath the skin, spreading from where his hands touched the branch, crawling up his forearms, toward his elbows, toward his shoulders, toward his heart. Where the branch had broken, black sap oozed out, not tree sap. This was thick like blood, almost gelatinous, and where it touched Alejandro's skin it seemed to soak in, to be absorbed, creating those black veins that spread like poison through his body. "Alejandro!" my father shouted, running forward. Let go of it!" But Alejandro didn't respond, didn't even seem to hear. Just knelt there trembling while those black veins spread higher and higher. My father and Sebastian grabbed his shoulders, tried to pull him away. But Alejandro's fingers had locked around that branch with rigor mortis strength. It took 3 men to pry his hands open, and even then his fingers kept curling, kept reaching back toward the branch, as if they had their own will, their own desire independent of his conscious mind. When the branch finally came free, falling to the ground between them, we all heard it, a sound from the forest, from the direction of the tree, or perhaps from beneath it, from underground. Not animal, not mechanical, not anything that should be possible in the natural world. A scream, high and feminine and full of rage and triumph mixed together. The scream of something that had been patient for a very long time and was now finally getting what it wanted. The scream echoed through the forest, through the clearing, through our bones and teeth. It went on for 10 seconds that felt like hours, and when it finally faded, the silence that followed was somehow worse because we could all feel something listening to that silence, counting our heartbeats, cataloging our fears. Alejandro collapsed in my father's arms. His eyes finally focused, finally saw us. And in a whisper that barely carried across the clearing, he said, "She's awake. Oh God, she's awake. She's been asleep under there for so long, and now she's awake, and she's so angry." We carried him back. His body burned with fever, but his hands, where they'd touched the branch, were ice cold, so cold they left frost on the skin of those carrying him despite the warm night. The black veins had spread past his elbows, visible now beneath his shirt, crawling toward his chest like strangling vines. And behind us as we left the clearing, I could have sworn I heard something else. Not a scream this time, a laugh. Soft and feminine and centuries old, bubbling up from underground like water from a poisoned well. The curse had begun, and we had no idea how to stop it. Alejandro didn't die immediately. That would have been merciful. That would have been a kindness the thing beneath the tree had no interest in granting. For 3 days he lay in his cabin bed, burning with fever that should have killed him within hours. The doctor from town, Dr. Ruiz, a competent man who'd practiced medicine for 30 years, who'd seen everything from snake bites to gunshot wounds to children dying of dehydration, took blood samples, ran every test his small-town clinic could manage, checked and rechecked his results because they made no sense. "There's nothing wrong with him," Dr. Ruiz said on the second day, standing in the yard with my father, speaking quietly so Alejandro's wife, Maria, wouldn't overhear. "Vitals are stable. Blood work is completely clean, no bacteria, no virus, no toxins, no abnormalities whatsoever. White blood cell count is normal. Red blood cells normal. Liver function, kidney function, everything all normal. By every medical measure available to me, this man is perfectly healthy. He's dying, my father said flatly. Anyone can see that. I know, but I don't know why. This isn't medical, Don Rodrigo. This is something else. Something outside my training, outside my understanding. Dr. Ruiz looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with his stethoscope. Have you considered calling a priest, or perhaps— He lowered his voice further. A curandera. My father's jaw tightened. He was a practical man, a modern man who believed in science and reason. But he was also Mexican, raised on stories of brujas and mal de ojo, of curses and spirit stories his grandmother had told him by candlelight when he was young. Stories he'd dismissed as superstition, but never quite forgotten. I'll consider it, he said. But Alejandro was dying. Everyone could see it. Medical tests be damned. His skin had taken on a grayish tint like meat going bad, like something already halfway to the grave. His eyes had sunken deep into his skull, creating dark hollows that made him look decades older than his 23 years. And the black veins from the sap had spread relentlessly, now visible across his entire torso, creeping up his neck toward his face, reaching down toward his legs, like dark fingers searching for his extremities. The veins pulsed, not with his heartbeat, but with their own rhythm, slower and more deliberate, as if something else was pumping through them, something that followed different rules than blood. You have to help him, Maria begged Dr. Ruiz, clutching baby Isabella to her chest, while tears streamed down her young face. Please, he's all I have. We just got married. Isabella needs her father. Please. I don't know what's killing him, doctor. Ruiz admitted the helplessness clear in his voice. This isn't bacterial. Antibiotics do nothing. It's not viral. Antivirals have no effect. It's not fungal, not parasitic, not any pathology I've encountered in 3 decades of practice. I'm sorry, Senora, I truly am. But I don't know how to fight something I can't identify. Because it wasn't medical, it was something that existed outside the realm of medicine, outside the world that doctors understood. It was old, ancient, something that predated antibiotics and x-rays and the scientific method by centuries. I was there on the second night sitting beside Alejandro's bed because my father wanted someone with him at all times, wanted to make sure he wasn't alone if the end came. Maria was in the next room trying to get Isabella to sleep, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy for the baby, who couldn't understand why her mother cried constantly, why her father's room smelled of sickness and fear. The cabin was small, just 2 rooms, a kitchen area, a tiny bathroom. The walls were thin wood, the furniture sparse but well maintained. Photos of Alejandro and Maria's wedding covered one waller in a simple white dress, him in a borrowed suit, both of them laughing and young and full of hope for a future that was now disintegrating. I sat in a wooden chair beside the bed, fighting to stay awake, fighting the overwhelming urge to run back to the main house where there were lights and people and the illusion of safety. The single lamp on the nightstand cast weak yellow light that barely pushed back the shadows gathering in the corners of the room. At exactly 3:17 a.m., I remember checking the clock on the nightstand, counting down the minutes until my father would relieve me. Alejandro began screaming. Not the screams of pain I'd heard from injured animals on the ranch, from cattle with broken legs or horses with colic. Not even the screams I'd heard 2 nights ago when we found him at the tree. This was different. This was the sound of someone being torn apart from the inside, the sound of a soul realizing it's trapped in something worse than death, something that won't end even when the body stops functioning. I jumped from the chair, ran to his bedside. Alejandro, what's wrong? What's happening? His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at the ceiling or through it at something beyond. His body arched off the bed back, bowing impossibly, muscles straining with superhuman tension. Sweat poured off him despite the fever soaking the sheets dripping onto the floor. And then I saw them appear. 3 parallel scratches materialized on his bare chest, starting from nothing, from unmarked skin 1 second to deep gouges the next, appearing as I watched, carving themselves into his flesh as if invisible claws were dragging across him. The skin parted. The flesh beneath showed red and wet. Blood welled up thick and dark, running down his ribs in streams, deep gouges that ran from his collarbone down to his navel, perfectly parallel, exactly the spacing you'd expect from a hand with long fingers tipped with claws. But nothing was touching him. The air remained empty. I could see the entire room small enough that nothing could hide. No one was there, just Alejandro and me, and the thing that was attacking him from somewhere we couldn't see, from some dimension that overlapped ours, just enough to reach through and hurt. My 12-year-old brain simply couldn't process it. I stood frozen hands gripping the bed rail, watching as impossible wounds created themselves on a human body right in front of me. My mind rejected what I was seeing, tried to find rational explanations. He's doing it to himself. His own nails are making those marks. It's some kind of stigmata. It's a medical condition I don't understand. But his hands were at his sides, fingers spread nowhere near his chest, and his fingernails were short and blunt, and the wounds were too deep, too precise, too clearly made by something other than human nails. Then I heard it laughter, soft, feminine, musical, almost like wind chimes made of bone, coming from the darkest corner of the room, the corner where the lamplight didn't quite reach, where shadows pooled thick and deep. I forced myself to look through every instinct, screamed not to scream, to run, to hide, to close my eyes and pretend this wasn't happening. Something stood there, not fully present, more like a photographic negative, a silhouette cut from deeper darkness and pressed against the wall like a paper doll. Tall, impossibly thin, like someone had taken a normal human body and stretched it on a rack until the proportions became alien. With hair that flowed down past where its feet should be moving slowly like underwater kelp, like it was responding to currents in air that shouldn't exist. And it was reaching toward Alejandro with fingers too long, too thin, extending from the darkness like spider legs tipped with curved claws that caught the lamplight and glinted with a dull sheen like old bone. The figure tilted its head, studying me. I felt its attention like physical weight, like being pressed down by invisible hands. And even though I couldn't see its face clearly in the darkness, couldn't make out features, I knew it was smiling, knew it was enjoying this, enjoying my fear, enjoying Alejandro's pain, enjoying the power it had over us, the helplessness we felt. I ran, screaming for my father, for Sebastian, for anyone. Behind me, Alejandro's screams cut off, abruptly replaced by choking sounds, gasping, the wet rattle of someone drowning in their own blood. I burst out of the cabin into the night, nearly falling down the porch steps, screaming at the top of my lungs. Lights came on in the main house. My father appeared in the doorway, rifle in hand. Sebastian ran from his cabin, machete drawn. "Miguel, what happened?" "Something's in there. Something's hurting him. I saw it. In the corner. It was reaching for him. And..." We ran back together. My father kicked open the cabin door. It hadn't been locked, but his fear made him violent, made him need to break something. We burst in with flashlights blazing, with weapons raised, with all the false courage of men who knew they were facing something they couldn't fight, but refused to admit it. The corner was empty, just wall and shadow and nothing more. But Alejandro lay gasping, covered in blood from the new scratches crisscrossing his torso. His sheets were soaked red. The smell of copper filled the small room, thick and cloying. "She was here," he whispered, voice raw from screaming. Standing right there in the corner, I could see her clearly, gray skin like old leather, black eyes like pits, hair full of roots and dirt like she just crawled out of the ground. She said I stole from her. Said every piece I took she'll take a piece from me. Said, his voice broke, tears mixing with sweat on his face. Said she's going to take me piece by piece until there's nothing left but bones for the tree. My father's hands shook as he lowered the rifle. In that moment, I saw him realize something that would haunt him for the rest of his short life. The world he thought he understood, the world of cattle and horses and honest work and problems that could be solved with money or muscle, that world didn't exist, had never existed. We'd just been lucky enough not to see the truth until now. Who? My father asked quietly. Who was here? The woman from the tree, the one who's been buried there. We woke her up. She's been sleeping under the ground for so long, decades maybe, and we woke her up. Alejandro grabbed my father's shirt with bloody hands, pulling him close. Don't let her take me, patron. Please. I have a wife. I have a baby girl. I'm only 23. I didn't mean to wake her. I just wanted to see the tree. Just wanted to understand. Please don't let her. Another scratch appeared across his face, diagonal from temple to jaw, the flesh parting like someone had drawn a razor across his skin, then another on his arms, then his legs, manifesting from nothing as if invisible claws were systematically flaying him alive while we watched helplessly. Maria's screams joined Alejandro's as she ran in from the other room, baby Isabella wailing in her arms, both of them seeing something that would destroy any illusion that the world was safe, that parents could protect their children, that love was enough to shield you from evil. We tried everything over the next 2 days. Everything we could think of, everything anyone suggested, grasping at straws because we had no other options. We called Padre Miguel, the priest from San Miguel de los Santos. He arrived within hours, a thin man in his 60s with gentle eyes and hands that had blessed thousands of babies, married hundreds of couples, administered last rites to countless dying souls. He entered Alejandro's cabin with his Bible, his holy water, his rosary blessed by the bishop in Chihuahua City. He performed blessings, sprinkled holy water on Alejandro and the bed, and every corner of the room recited prayers in Latin that echoed off the thin walls. His voice was strong and sure, full of faith accumulated over 40 years of service to God and the Church. The scratches kept appearing. The holy water had no effect. The Latin prayers might as well have been nursery rhymes for all the protection they provided. Padre Miguel left after 2 hours, his face pale and troubled. This is beyond my authority, he admitted to my father outside where Alejandro couldn't hear. This isn't a demon I can exorcise with prayer and holy water. This is something older, something that predates Christianity, that predates Christ himself, something from the time before the Word. I'm sorry, Don Rodrigo, I failed you. You tried, Padre. That's all anyone can do. There's someone else you might try. The priest hesitated. Doña Rosa. She lives on the edge of town. She practices. He paused, uncomfortable. The old ways, curanderismo, herb lore, things the church doesn't officially sanction but also doesn't officially condemn, things that have been practiced in Mexico since before the Spanish came. If anyone can help, it might be her. So we called Doña Rosa, an old woman in her 80s, bent and weathered like a mesquite root, with eyes so dark they looked black and hands covered in burn scars from decades of working with fire and herbs. She arrived carrying a leather bag that smelled of smoke and plants and things I couldn't identify. She didn't ask questions. Just looked at Alejandro, looked at the scratches, looked at the black veins spreading under his skin. Then she nodded once, as if confirming something she'd already suspected. She burned herbs in a clay bowl, copal and sage and other things I didn't recognize, creating thick smoke that filled the cabin and made my eyes water. She created protective circles around the bed using salt and cornmeal, speaking in what I later learned was Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs, words that had been used for protection and healing for over 1,000 years. She chanted for 2 hours, voice rising and falling in rhythms that seemed to bypass my conscious mind and speak directly to something deeper, something primal. She pressed poultices to Alejandro's wounds, made from plants she'd gathered herself, plants that grew in secret places known only to those who studied the old ways. The scratches kept appearing. The herbs had no effect. The ancient words might as well have been silence. Doña Rosa left at dawn, shaking her head. "This is not my realm," she told my father, speaking Spanish with an accent that suggested it wasn't her first language, that she'd learned it decades ago but still thought in Nahuatl. "This is not medicine. This is not even curses as I understand them. This is vengeance of the earth itself. Someone was buried wrong. Someone was killed wrong. The land remembers. The land holds grudges. And now it's collecting what it's owed. How do we stop it? You don't. You can only hope it takes what it wants and goes back to sleep. Or she looked toward the forest. You can try to make peace with it. Try to understand what it wants. Try to give it back what was taken." What was taken? I don't know. But whatever it is, it's something that can't be replaced with money or prayers or herbs. It's something deeper, something about justice, or perhaps just revenge. The line between the two gets very thin when you've been buried in darkness for decades. On the third day, the branch Alejandro had taken from the tree vanished from his cabin. We'd locked it in a wooden chest in the corner of the room, intending to burn it once we figured out how to do so safely. Sebastian had suggested burning it might make things worse, might anger whatever lived in the tree even more. So we'd locked it away, hidden. It hoped that containing it would somehow help contain the curse. That morning when Sebastian went to check on Alejandro, he found the chest open. The padlock still locked and secured, but the lid standing wide. And inside, nothing. Just empty space where the black branch had been. We searched everywhere, tore apart the cabin. Checked every room, every corner, every possible hiding place. The branch had simply vanished, passed through a locked chest and locked door like they were made of mist. That evening, I found it on my pillow. I'd been at the main house all day trying to do homework my teacher had sent home, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. When I went to my room at sunset to change my shirt, before dinner there it was. The black branch, about 3 feet long, still wet with Alejandro's dried blood, placed carefully in the center of my pillow like a gift, like an offering, like a promise. Wrapped around it was a single strand of hair, long, black, thick. And when I looked closely, when I forced myself to overcome my revulsion and actually examine it, I realized it wasn't hair at all. It was a root. A thin black root, organic and vegetable, that squirmed slightly when I stared at it too long, moved with a life of its own like it was trying to burrow into the fabric beneath it. I screamed and stumbled backward, hitting the wall, sliding down it until I was sitting on the floor with my knees pulled up to my chest, unable to take my eyes off that thing on my bed. My father burst in within seconds, Sebastian right behind him. They saw what I was looking at, and both men went pale. "How did it get in here?" my father asked. "The doors are locked. The windows are locked. How?" "It doesn't matter how," Sebastian said quietly. "What matters is why. Why did it bring the branch here? Why leave it for Miguel?" "Because she's chosen him," a voice said from the doorway. We all turned to see Doña Rosa standing there. None of us had heard her arrive, hadn't heard her walk up the stairs, hadn't heard her approach. She just appeared as if she'd been there all along, and we'd only now noticed her. She showed herself to the boy first, at his window. She marked him then. He has what she needs. "What does she need?" my father demanded, his voice sharp with fear and frustration. "A witness. Someone who can see her, who can tell her story, who can spread her fear. Someone young enough to carry the memory for decades. Someone who can make sure she's never forgotten again." Doña Rosa looked at me with something like pity. "The boy has the sight. He saw her when she didn't call him. That means his mind is open to things most people's are closed to. She needs that, needs him. Then we'll send him away, tonight, to family in Mexico City, somewhere far from here. It won't matter. She's marked him. Distance means nothing to something like this. She'll find him wherever he goes. The connection is made. It can't be unmade." My father grabbed the branch, using a towel, careful not to let his bare skin touch it. "We're burning this, now. And if that makes things worse, so be it. I won't have it in my house." We went outside, all of us, gathering in the yard as the sun set and darkness began its nightly conquest of the land. My father built a fire in a metal barrel we used for burning trash, doused the branch with gasoline from the generator shed, and threw it in. The branch burned, but not like normal wood. The flames were the wrong color, greenish-yellow, sickly, producing smoke that smelled like rotting meat and burning hair. And as it burned, it screamed. Not metaphorically. It literally screamed, a woman's voice, high and anguished, coming from the flames themselves, coming from the wood, as it blackened and split. The scream went on for 5 minutes, 5 endless minutes of that voice howling in rage or agony, or both a sound that made everyone in the yard cover their ears, that made the dogs howl in response, that made the cattle in the distant pasture stampede in blind panic. And when the scream finally faded as the branch was reduced to ash, we heard something else. From half a mile away, from the direction of the forest, something howled in response. Not coyote, not wolf, not any animal that should exist in the natural world. A sound that was part howl, part scream, part something that didn't have a name in any human language. A sound of rage, of promise, of coming retribution. Alejandro died that night at 11:34 p.m. I wasn't there. My father had finally sent me back to the main house, had locked me in my room with instructions not to come out until morning no matter what I heard. But I heard about it from Sebastian the next morning, saw the trauma in the old man's face as he described what had happened. He died fighting, Sebastian said, voice flat and distant, like he was talking about something that happened to someone else, like the only way he could discuss it was to emotionally disconnect completely. Clawing at the air with his hands, trying to fight off something only he could see. Screaming about hands pulling him down, about dirt in his mouth, about suffocating underground. His last words, Sebastian's voice cracked, the first emotion breaking through. He looked right at me and said, "She's pulling me down, under the earth. I can feel the roots growing through me. Tell Maria I'm sorry. Tell Isabella I love her. Don't let them dig me up. Don't let anyone dig where they bury me. Don't let her add me to the..." And then he just stopped, mid-sentence, like someone had flipped a switch. They found him half out of bed, his body twisted at an impossible angle, one hand reaching desperately toward the door like he'd been trying to crawl away from something at the last moment, the other hand clutched at his throat, fingers dug into his own flesh as if he'd been trying to pull away something invisible that was strangling him. His eyes were open, bulging, filled with such profound terror that Sebastian said he'd never forget them, that he saw those eyes every time he closed his own eyes to sleep. But the worst part, the detail that made even hardened ranch workers refuse to enter the cabin afterward, was what they found on the floor. The black veins hadn't stopped when Alejandro died. They'd continued spreading, had covered his entire body by the time they found him turning his skin into a road map of darkness. He looked like a marble statue, like something carved from stone and inlaid with obsidian, and where his hands had touched the floor, scrabbling for purchase, as whatever invisible force dragged him toward death, his fingernails had torn completely off. The wood was gouged with parallel scratches, deep grooves carved into the hard plank, splinters embedded in the bloody stumps of his fingers. The scratches led toward the wall facing the forest, toward the north, toward the tree. As if in his last moments something had been pulling him in that direction, trying to drag him through solid matter, through walls and doors and the very earth itself, back to where the curse had started. We buried Alejandro 2 days later in the town cemetery, 20 miles from the ranch. The priest performed the service, but I noticed his hands trembled as he read the prayers, noticed he kept glancing over his shoulder as if expecting something to appear behind him. As they lowered the coffin into the ground, dark clouds gathered overhead despite the weather forecast calling for clear skies. They piled up in minutes, roiling, and black shot through with lightning that never quite touched the ground. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many minutes. It didn't rain. The clouds just hung there, pressing down, making the air thick and hard to breathe. and they stayed there until the last shovel of dirt was thrown on the grave, until the mourners had all left. Then they dispersed as quickly as they'd formed, leaving clear blue sky and punishing heat as if they'd never existed. Maria left that afternoon, taking Isabella and whatever she could fit in a single bag, walking to the bus station in town, rather than wait for someone to drive her desperate to get away from the ranch, from the memories, from the thing that had killed her husband. We never saw her again. I heard later she moved back in with her parents in Durango, never remarried, worked 2 jobs to support herself and her daughter. Isabella grew up never knowing her father except through stories and photographs. That night every phone on the ranch stopped working. Not lost signal, we rarely had signal anyway. Completely dead. When you picked them up, the screens remained black. Pressing buttons did nothing. The phones had simply ceased to function despite full batteries, despite being different brands and models, despite being in different locations. My father tried the landline. No dial tone, just static. But if you listened carefully to that static, if you pressed the receiver close to your ear and really focused, you could hear something underneath it. Whispers, many whispers, dozens of voices overlapping, all speaking at once in a language that sounded almost like Spanish, but wasn't like someone had taken Spanish and corrupted it, aged it backward 1,000 years until it became something older and stranger. And underneath the whispers, barely audible, but definitely their laughter. That same feminine laughter I'd heard in Alejandro's cabin, delighted, cruel, patient. "We need to leave," Sebastian said that night, standing in my father's office with the other remaining workers. "Pack essentials and drive to town. Get the police, get help. Something is hunting us, Patron. Something that killed Alejandro and won't stop with him." "This is my land," my father said, but there was doubt in his voice now, uncertainty creeping in. "Everything I've built, I can't just abandon it." "What good is land if you're dead?" Diego asked. "What good is anything if we're all in the ground like Alejandro?" "Then we leave at first light," my father decided. "Take both trucks. Everyone goes. We'll come back with authorities, with help, with whatever we need. But we don't go in the dark. We wait for sunrise." But when we went outside to check the trucks to make sure they were fueled and ready, we discovered we weren't leaving. Not in vehicles anyway. 4 trucks. My father's Silverado, Sebastian's old Ford, and 2 ranch trucks we used for hauling supplies. All of them maintained meticulously. My father personally checked them every week. All of them with full tanks. All of them with charged batteries. Not one would start. Diego, who knew engines better than anyone, popped the hood of the first truck. Then he stepped back fast, making the sign of the cross with shaking hands, his face gone pale in the flashlight beam. "Patron," he said, "you need to see this." We crowded around. The flashlight beams illuminated the engine compartment. It was filled with roots. Thin, black roots had grown through every component, threading through the engine like a spider's web. They wrapped around the battery, coiled through the spark plug wires, threaded between the pistons, wrapped around the engine block itself. The roots were fresh. You could see sap still oozing from broken ends where they'd been cut by the hood closing. They were organic, alive somehow, growing in metal and plastic and rubber environments where nothing should grow. "Check the others," my father ordered, his voice hollow. "Every truck, same thing." The roots had infiltrated them all during the day while we'd been at the funeral, had grown through the engines in hours when natural growth should take years, strangling the machinery, making it impossible for the vehicles to function. We were trapped. No communication, no transportation. Isolated on a cursed ranch with something that had already killed once and clearly wasn't finished. "What do we do?" Felipe asked, his voice small and frightened. My father looked toward the forest, barely visible in the darkness. "We survive until morning. We barricade the house, we stay together. And when the sun comes up, we walk to town if we have to. 20 miles. We can make it." 20 miles through territory where that thing can hunt us," Tomas muttered. "You have a better idea." No one did. So we went inside, pushed heavy furniture against all the doors and windows. lit every lamp and candle we could find, and waited for dawn. At exactly 10:00 p.m., every flashlight in the main house died simultaneously. Not dead batteries, they'd all been fresh, we'd checked. They simply stopped working, as if the very concept of artificial light had been revoked, as if whatever was hunting us had decided that our defenses were no longer permitted. Then the house lights began going out. One by one, room by room, darkness consumed the building like a living thing. The living room light flickered once, twice, then went dark. The kitchen followed, then the hallway, the bathroom, the bedrooms upstairs. We huddled in the dining room, myself, my father, Sebastian, Diego, Mateo, Lucas, Felipe, Tomas, and Ernesto, 9 of us total, 8 adults and one terrified 12-year-old boy. We'd pushed the heavy wooden table against one door, stacked chairs against another, and now sat in the center of the room around candles that cast weak, flickering light that seemed to be losing its battle against the encroaching darkness. "How long until sunrise?" Felipe asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking loudly might attract attention. 7 hours, my father said, checking his watch. We can last 7 hours. But 7 hours felt like 7 lifetimes. The darkness outside the windows was absolute, not the normal darkness of a moonless night, but something deeper, something that seemed to have texture and weight, something that pressed against the glass like it was trying to force its way inside. And we could hear things, not clear sounds, just suggestions of sounds. Footsteps that might have been wind, scratching that might have been branches, breathing that might have been our own fear. But we all knew the truth. She was out there, circling, testing our defenses, looking for weakness. At 11:45 p.m., my father made a decision that would seal the fate of half the men in that room. "We need to try the backup generator," he said. "It's in the storage shed. If we can get power restored, get lights back on, maybe that will help. Maybe light keeps her away. Or maybe it'll make her angrier," Sebastian countered. "Light didn't protect Alejandro. What choice do we have? Sit here in the dark and wait for her to pick us off one by one?" "I'll go," Diego volunteered, standing up. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. "I know how to start the generator." "I'll go with you," Mateo said, standing as well. "You'll need someone to watch your back." They armed themselves with machetes, took 2 of the precious candles, and slipped out through the back door. We watched from the window, tracking them by their small flames as they crossed the yard toward the storage shed, 50 feet away. The yard seemed longer than usual, the darkness between the house and shed deeper than it should be. The 2 flames bobbed and weaved as the men ran, and for a horrible moment I thought the flames would go out, thought the darkness would simply swallow them. But they reached the shed. We saw Mateo's silhouette as he unlocked the door, saw both men step inside, saw the door close behind them. Then a moment later, the shed lights blazed on. Bright, harsh, fluorescent lights that cut through the darkness like knives. Beautiful lights that meant power, that meant civilization, that meant maybe we had a chance. For 3 seconds. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice, 3 times. And then they exploded. Every bulb in the shed burst simultaneously, the sound like gunshots, the noise carrying across the yard. We heard glass falling, tinkling on concrete. We heard Diego and Mateo screaming. Not screams of pain, screams of pure existential terror. My father and Sebastian grabbed torches and ran toward the shed. I followed despite my father yelling at me to stay inside, to hide, to lock myself in a closet. But I couldn't. Something compelled me forward, something needed to see, needed to witness. When we burst through the shed door, we found Diego and Mateo on the floor, pressed into the far corner, staring at something the rest of us couldn't see. "She's here!" Diego gasped, eyes wide and unblinking. "In the darkness. She doesn't like light. When we turned it on, she screamed. Such rage in that scream. Then she moved faster than anything should move, faster than thought, and she broke everything, broke every light. And now she's just standing there in the corner watching us, waiting." "There's nothing here," my father said, sweeping his torch around the empty shed. "Just shadows." "No," Mateo whispered, pointing with a trembling hand. Look at the corner, really look at it." We did. And slowly, reluctantly, I saw what they meant. The shadow in the back corner was wrong. Despite the torchlight shining directly on it, despite 3 bright flames illuminating the shed, that corner remained absolutely black, not dark black, no gradation, no lessening, no variation, just a pool of total darkness in the shape of something standing upright. And as we watched, it grew, spread. The darkness crept up the walls like oil seeping through cracks, like ink spreading through water, claiming more territory, reaching toward us with fingers of shadow that had substance despite being absence. "Out!" my father said, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Everyone out! Now! Now!" We ran, all 5 of us fleeing that spreading darkness, hearing behind us that sound, that woman's laughter, delighted and cruel and incredibly patient, the laugh of something that had all the time in the world to play with us before it took what it wanted. When we barricaded ourselves back in the house, gasping and shaking, we discovered that something had changed while we were gone. The candles in the dining room had been rearranged. We'd left them scattered across the table in random positions. Now they formed a perfect circle, geometric, deliberate, impossible. And in the center of that circle, written in something dark and wet that none of us wanted to identify, was a message in neat, old-fashioned script: "Return what belongs to me." Below the message, placed with care in the exact center, a photograph. My school photo from last year, the one I'd kept in a frame on my desk upstairs. The frame was gone, just the photo itself, carefully extracted, and on my face someone had drawn 2 X's with black ink over my eyes, like I was already dead, like I was already claimed. My father picked it up with trembling hands, staring at it like it was a snake. "Why, Miguel?" he whispered, to the empty air, to God, to whatever was listening. He never touched the tree. He never even went near it. Why him? But I knew why, even if I couldn't explain it. She'd chosen me that first night at my window. When I'd seen her before, she'd called me. When I'd proved I could perceive what others couldn't, when I'd looked directly at her true form, and not just glimpsed a shadow from the corner of my eye. I had the sight as Doña Rosa had called it, and she needed someone with the sight, someone who could be her witness, her messenger, her prophet of fear. "She's not going to stop," Sebastian said quietly, stating the obvious truth we'd all been avoiding. "Is she?" My father looked around at all of us. 8 men and 1 terrified boy, all that remained of the ranch's workforce. "No," he finally admitted, the word heavy with defeat. "I don't think she is." The night stretched on. Each minute felt like an hour. Every creak of the house settling sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind against the windows sounded like breathing. Every shadow seemed to move when we weren't looking directly at it. We took turns watching 2 men always awake while the others tried to rest, but no one really slept. How could you sleep knowing something was circling the house, testing the walls, looking for a way in? At 4:45 a.m., with false dawn still more than an hour away, Mateo made the suggestion that would doom them all. "We need to destroy it," he said, his voice rough from fear and exhaustion. "The tree, that's where she is. That's where her power comes from. If we destroy the tree, maybe she'll have nowhere to return to. Maybe we can trap her, burn her, end this." "That's suicide," Sebastian said immediately, his face grave. "Look what happened to Alejandro just for taking a branch. What do you think she'll do if we try to destroy the whole tree? If we try to destroy her?" "What choice do we have?" Lucas argued, standing up and pacing the room like a caged animal. "Sit here and wait for her to pick us off one by one. Wait for morning and try to walk 20 miles while she hunts us through open country. At least if we go to the tree, we're taking the fight to her. At least we're doing something instead of just waiting to die." "We'll all die if we go to that tree," Sebastian said. "Every single one of us. That's what she wants. That's what she's been pushing us toward. Can't you see she's hurting us, driving us to her?" The argument went in circles for an hour. Stay and hide, go and fight, run and hope. Every option seemed like death, just death wearing different masks. Finally, my father made the decision. He was the patron, the boss, the one whose word was law on this ranch. When the sun rises, we go, all of us. We take gasoline axes matches. We burn that tree to ash and we salt the earth around it. We destroy whatever's buried there. It's our only chance. I wanted to scream at them not to go. Wanted to say they were doing exactly what she wanted, walking into her trap like sheep to slaughter. But I was 12 years old. My voice didn't carry weight. And maybe they knew it was a trap and just didn't care anymore. Maybe facing death head-on seemed preferable to cowering in the dark, waiting for it to come for you. At 5:30 a.m., with the first gray hint of dawn barely touching the eastern sky, we left the house. 9 souls walking toward judgment, toward destiny, toward whatever ending the thing beneath the tree had planned for us. The forest felt different in pre-dawn light. Still dark, the canopy too dense for much light penetration, but no longer the absolute blackness of night. Just thick, oppressive gloom like walking through twilight, preserved in amber like time itself, moved differently under those trees. We followed the path Diego and Mateo had taken. It seemed wider now, clearer. As if the forest was making it easy for us to find our destination, as if the undergrowth had pulled back to create a corridor leading directly to the heart of the darkness. That should have been warning enough, but fear makes you stupid. Terror makes you blind to obvious signs. "Why is it so quiet?" I whispered to Sebastian, who walked beside me, his machete ready, his eyes constantly scanning the shadows. "No animals," he replied, voice equally quiet. "They've all fled. They're smarter than us. They know when to run and actually do it." 20 minutes of walking. No one spoke except for that one exchange. Just the sound of our footsteps on dry leaves, our increasingly labored breathing, the creak of leather as hands gripped weapons, tighter the jingle of metal as gasoline cans bumped against legs. Then the trees opened up and we reached the clearing, and I saw the tree in daylight for the first time, and I understood why Diego and Mateo hadn't been able to describe it properly. Because words weren't enough. Language failed in the face of it. The tree stood in its circle of dead earth like a monument to something that should never have been born, like a gravestone marking the burial site of sanity itself. The descriptions I'd heard, Diego's stammering attempts, Mateo's whispered recollections, even my father's terse acknowledgments, none of them had prepared me for the reality. This was something that existed on a scale beyond human comprehension, something that made your eyes hurt to look at directly, that made your brain stutter as it tried to process impossible proportions and geometry that shouldn't work in three-dimensional space. The trunk was massive, easily 12 feet in diameter at the base, and it spiraled upward like a twisted rope, like someone had taken a normal tree and wrung it like a wet towel, wringing and wringing until the wood had been permanently deformed into this spiral pattern that hurt to follow with your eyes. The spiral drew your gaze upward, pulling your vision along its curves, making you dizzy, making you feel like you were falling even though you were standing still. The bark was black, not dark brown or charcoal gray, absolute black, like staring into deep space, like looking into a hole cut in reality itself. But it had a quality underneath the blackness, a faint luminescence that pulsed slowly like a heartbeat, like something bioluminescent lived beneath the surface, something that glowed with its own sick light. The glow was greenish-yellow, the color of infection, the color of things rotting in deep places where sunlight never reached. The branches extended in all directions with no apparent pattern, no logic to their growth. Some reached toward the sky, others bent back toward the ground. Some twisted around themselves in loops and spirals, and every branch was covered in leaves. Hundreds, maybe thousands of leaves, nearly as black as the bark itself, each one perfect and still. Despite a breeze I could feel on my face strong enough to move my hair, the leaves didn't move, not a flutter, not a tremble. They hung as if carved from obsidian and welded to the branches as if they were decorative rather than functional, as if the tree didn't follow normal rules of biology and didn't need to photosynthesize or exchange gases or do any of the things normal trees did. And the roots, dear God, the roots. They writhed above ground in a perfect circle around the trunk, each one as thick as my torso, black and glistening, like they were covered in slime or sap. But they weren't still like normal roots. They moved. Slowly, rhythmically coiling and uncoiling in a pattern that looked disturbingly like breathing, like the tree was a massive lung drawing in and expelling air, its chest rising and falling with each breath. The movement was hypnotic. Once you noticed it, you couldn't look away. The roots breathed and your eyes followed the motion, and your brain tried to make sense of it and failed and tried again and failed and kept trying until you felt yourself being pulled forward, being drawn closer, needing to understand, needing to touch, needing to become part of this impossible thing. But worse than the tree itself, worse than its size or color or wrongness, were the additions that hadn't been there before. 7 figures stood around the tree's perimeter, arranged in a perfect circle about 15 feet from the trunk. At first I thought they were statues, sculptures someone had placed there as some kind of grotesque art installation. But as my eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the canopy, I realized with creeping horror what I was looking at. They were people, or had been people. Now they were something between human and tree, caught in transition, transformed into something that violated every natural law. Each figure was buried from the waist down in the earth, only their upper bodies visible above ground. But those upper bodies had changed. The skin had taken on a gray-brown color, rough and textured like bark with deep grooves and ridges that made them look more vegetable than animal. Their arms were raised overhead, frozen in that position with fingers elongated into thin branch-like extensions that stretched toward the sky, growing longer and thinner until they ended in points, some of them already sprouting small black buds that might one day become leaves. Their faces were tilted back, looking up at nothing, mouths open in expressions that could have been agony or ecstasy or both. Some of them seemed to be screaming silently. Others appeared to be smiling lips pulled back to show teeth that had turned black and were beginning to fuse together. Their eyes were open, but the eyes were wrong, completely black from corner to corner, no whites remaining, just solid darkness that seemed to go on forever if you looked too closely. And they were breathing, barely perceptible, but definitely breathing. Their chests rose and fell in that same slow rhythm as the roots synchronized with the tree, no longer independent organisms, but extensions of something larger, parts of a greater whole. I recognized one of them immediately, even with the transformation, Diego. Our Diego who'd found the tree first, who'd touched it just yesterday, who we'd left behind in our panicked flight. His features were still distinguishable beneath the bark-like skin, his expression frozen in what might have been wonder or horror or some emotion that didn't have a name. "Dios mío," Sebastian breathed beside me, making the sign of the cross with trembling hands. "Those are people. Those are the others who touched the tree. She's collecting them, growing them, making them part of her garden." "They're still alive," Mateo whispered, his voice breaking. "Look, they're breathing. They're still conscious in there, trapped, aware." The full horror of it crashed over me like a wave. These people weren't dead. Death would have been mercy. They were transformed, incorporated into the tree's ecosystem, kept alive and aware as they slowly became something other than human, as they were digested over years or decades or centuries. And then I felt it. We all felt it simultaneously, like someone had flipped a switch that turned on a magnet buried in our chests. The pull. It wasn't physical force. Nothing pushed or dragged me forward. It was deeper than that, more fundamental. Every cell in my body suddenly wanted to be closer to that tree, needed to be closer. My rational mind screamed danger, screamed to run, screamed that this was death and worse than death. But my feet wanted to step forward. My hands wanted to reach out. My entire being oriented toward that black bark like a compass needle finding north, like a moth drawn to flame, like something in my DNA recognized that tree as home and wanted to return. "Fight it," my father commanded. but his own feet were moving forward one shuffling step at a time as if pulled by invisible strings. "Everyone dig your heels in. Don't get closer. Don't—" But it was too late for some of them. Lucas's eyes glazed over, his expression going slack and distant. He dropped his machete and began walking toward the tree like a sleepwalker, arms hanging at his sides, moving with mechanical precision. "Lucas, no!" Sebastian shouted, grabbing his arm. But Lucas was stronger in his trance, or perhaps whatever was pulling him was stronger. He shrugged off Sebastian's grip without even acknowledging it, never breaking stride, never taking his eyes off that black bark. Felipe followed, then Tomas, then Ernesto. One by one their eyes went unfocused, and they began walking forward like puppets on strings, like their bodies were no longer their own to control. "Stop them!" my father roared. But even as he shouted the command, I could see him fighting the same urge, see his muscles straining as he forced himself to stay in place, to not follow the others into that clearing. Diego and Mateo tried to grab the walking men, tried to pull them back, but they might as well have been trying to stop bulldozers. The entranced men pushed them aside easily, showing no recognition, no awareness of anything except the tree and the overwhelming need to reach it. All four men, Lucas, Felipe, Tomas, and Ernesto, reached the tree at nearly the same moment. As if choreographed, as if following a script, all four placed their hands flat against that black bark. And the tree screamed. It was the same sound I'd heard when Alejandro took the branch, but louder, more triumphant. A sound like metal tearing, like the earth splitting open, like reality itself, cracking under strain. The scream echoed through the forest, through the clearing, through my bones and teeth, making my jaw ache, making my skull vibrate like a tuning fork. The scream had layers. The top layer was that feminine voice, high and victorious, full of dark joy. But underneath it were other voices, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all screaming in harmony, or agony, or both. All the voices of everyone the tree had ever taken, all the souls trapped in its roots, all crying out in greeting or warning or simple despair. The four men froze, hands fused to the bark as if the wood had become liquid for a moment, and then re-solidified around their flesh, incorporating them, claiming them. Their eyes rolled back, showing only whites. No, not whites, showing nothing but black, as their irises and pupils were consumed by darkness from within. And then, most horrible of all, they began to smile. All four men, their mouths stretching wider than mouths should stretch, lips pulling back to show teeth and gums and the beginning of throats, smiling with expressions of absolute rapture and absolute horror, mixed together in a way that human faces weren't designed to display. They spoke, four mouths, one voice, her voice, that ancient feminine voice I'd heard in Alejandro's cabin, coming from the men like they were speakers broadcasting a signal from somewhere else. "Eight have fallen," the voice said, using the men's mouths, their lips moving in perfect synchronization like a disturbing chorus. "4 more join my garden. 5 remain free, but not for long, never for long. The old man sees, the boy witnesses, the others will follow, they always follow." Then the 4 men's heads turned as one, moving with mechanical precision, necks rotating far beyond what necks should rotate, until all 4 were looking directly at me. "Hello again, little witness," the voice said, and all 4 men smiled wider, their mouths opening impossibly, showing darkness inside that went down and down forever. "Did you think distance would protect you? Did you think walls and locks would keep me out? I've been in your house, touched your pillow, moved your things. I can reach anywhere. I am everywhere the darkness falls, and darkness falls everywhere eventually." "Let them go!" my father shouted, raising his axe, advancing toward the tree, even though I could see him trembling, see the terror in his face, warring with his desperate need to do something, to fight back against the impossible. The 4 men laughed in unison. "Let them go, but they came to me freely. They touched my wood willingly. They are mine by right and ritual and hunger. You cannot take back what has been given. You cannot undo what has been done. This is the price of curiosity. This is the cost of disturbing what should remain buried." My father swung the axe. The blade caught Lucas in the shoulder, not deep. My father's aim was off, his hands shaking too badly but deep enough to draw blood. Except it wasn't blood that flowed from the wound, it was sap. Black, thick sap that oozed out slowly, viscous and wrong. Lucas didn't flinch, didn't cry out, just continued smiling that impossible smile while black sap ran down his shirt. "You cannot kill what is already dead," the voice said through all four mouths. "You cannot harm what has already been consumed. These shells you see before you, they are just that. Shells, meat, empty houses for my voice. The men you knew are already gone already, mine already growing in my roots deep below, where you cannot see, where you cannot reach, where they will stay forever and ever and ever." The four men collapsed as one, folding at the knees, falling to the ground at the base of the tree. Their hands remained stuck to the bark, their arms stretched upward as they knelt, as if praying, as if worshiping. Their eyes remained open but empty, staring at nothing, seeing nothing as their bodies began the slow transformation we'd witnessed in the others, as their skin began to take on that gray-brown texture, as their humanity began to leach away into the hungry earth. "Run!" Sebastian gasped beside me. His face was white as paper, his hands clenched so tight around his machete that his knuckles had gone pale. "Miguel, Don Rodrigo, we need to run. Now, right now, before she—" But he didn't finish the sentence because something else was happening. The seven figures that had been standing motionless around the tree's perimeter, the ones who'd been there when we arrived, the ones who'd been transformed days or weeks or months ago, they began to move. Slowly, jerkily, like marionettes being manipulated by an inexperienced puppeteer, they pulled themselves from the ground. Roots tore free from earth with wet, sucking sounds. Dirt cascaded from their lower bodies, revealing legs that were more root than flesh, now that had fused and twisted and changed into something neither fully plant nor fully animal. They shambled toward us, arms still raised overhead, fingers still elongated into branch-like extensions, mouths still open in those eternal screams or smiles. They moved with terrible purpose, spreading out to cut off escape routes, herding us deeper into the clearing, closer to the tree. "Run," my father said, and this time it was a command, not a suggestion. "Run!" We ran. Crashed back through the undergrowth, following no path now, just fleeing in blind terror branches, whipping our faces, thorns, tearing our clothes and skin lungs, burning from the effort and the fear. Behind us, I could hear them following. Not running, they couldn't run with their root legs, couldn't move quickly, but they were relentless, tireless, pursuing with the patience of things that no longer measured time the way humans did, things that could follow for hours or days or years without rest, without stopping, without doubt. And beneath the sound of their shambling pursuit, I heard something else. Heavier footsteps, uneven, dragging, the sound of something larger, something that moved with more purpose, something that had been sleeping underground and was now walking for the first time in decades. I glanced back once, just for a second, and immediately wished I hadn't. She was there, fully present, fully physical. No longer just shadow or suggestion or voice from the darkness, real, solid, walking. She was tall, at least 7 feet, maybe more, hard to judge with the trees and shadows, and my own terror distorting perspective. Impossibly thin, like a human body stretched on a rack, until every proportion became alien, until arms and legs were too long, torso too narrow, neck extending too far. Her skin was gray, the gray of old leather or tree bark, stretched tight over bones that created sharp angles and deep hollows in all the wrong places. Her hair hung to the ground, thick and black and full of roots that writhed like snakes that seemed to have their own life, that connected her to the earth itself. Her face, God, her face was almost beautiful in some terrible way, high cheekbones and full lips that would have been lovely on a living woman, but were horrifying on this thing that was neither living nor dead, but some third option that shouldn't exist. Her eyes were the worst part. Not because they were terrible, but because they weren't there at all. Just holes where eyes should be, pits of absolute darkness that went down and down forever, that had things moving in them, writhing in the depths like worms in rotten meat. And she was smiling, lips pulled back to show black teeth and blacker gums and a throat that descended into more darkness. Smiling because this was a game to her, because our terror amused her, because she'd been patient for so long, and now finally she was awake and hunting and collecting what she was owed. "You can run, little ones." Her voice echoed through the forest, seeming to come from everywhere at once, from the trees themselves. "Run as fast as you can. Run until your lungs burst and your legs fail and your hearts give out. I have eternity. I can wait. And when you fall, when you finally collapse from exhaustion and fear, I'll be there. I'm always there. I'm in every shadow you pass, every dark place you flee toward. There is no escape. There is only delay. And the longer you make me wait, the worse it will be when I finally take you." We burst out of the forest, just as the sun fully crested the horizon, spilling golden light across the grassland. The bright morning light should have felt safe, should have driven back the terror, should have made the nightmare less real. It didn't, because even in full daylight I could still smell her. That sweet rot, that smell of flowers blooming on corpses, that smell of decay masquerading as life. Even in full sunlight I could still hear her. That laugh, that patient, delighted, terrible laugh that said she was enjoying this, that said she had all the time in the world, that said we'd only delayed the inevitable. And worst of all, even in full daylight, when I looked back at the forest edge, I could see her standing there. Not hidden in shadow, not obscured by darkness. Just standing in plain view, 7 feet tall and impossibly thin, gray skin, stark against the green foliage behind her, those empty eye sockets tracking our movement like a predator watching prey. She didn't follow us into the open, didn't chase us across the grassland, just stood there watching, smiling, waiting. Because she didn't need to chase us. She'd already won, had already taken half our number, had already marked me, had already claimed the ranch as her territory, had made it clear that we were here because she allowed it, that we lived, because she hadn't yet decided to stop our hearts. We made it back to the house, 8 of us now. My father, Sebastian, Diego, Mateo, and me, the only ones who'd resisted the pull, who'd managed to not touch the tree. And the 4 who'd touched it and were now shambling somewhere in the forest, transforming, becoming part of her collection. No, not 8. 7, because Diego and Mateo had touched the tree that first time days ago. They'd just been stronger, had fought off the initial infection better than the others, but the sickness was in them, the corruption was spreading. It was only a matter of time. We barricaded ourselves in the house, pushed every piece of heavy furniture against doors and windows, lit every lamp and candle, and waited for nightfall because we all knew that's when she'd come. That afternoon, my father called me into his office. The room was dim despite the lamp burning on his desk, as if light itself was being absorbed by something, as if the shadows in the corners were deeper than they should be. He looked like he'd aged 20 years in the past week. His hair seemed grayer, his face more lined, his eyes sunken with exhaustion and terror, and something else, guilt maybe, or resignation. His hands trembled as he poured himself a whiskey, didn't offer me any because even in extremis he was still a father who didn't give 12-year-olds alcohol. "Miguel," he said, voice hoarse. "I need to tell you something, about the tree, about what I found there, before all this started." "When?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know, wanted to preserve the image of my father as someone who'd never broken his promise to Senora Valdez, who'd never touched the cursed thing. 5 days ago, after Diego and Mateo found it, after they came back talking about it, making everyone else want to see it. He took a long drink, the whiskey disappearing in 2 gulps. I thought if I could destroy it before anyone else got curious, before anyone else touched it, I could stop this. So I took an axe. I waited until everyone was asleep, and I went into the forest alone. Papa, no. Let me finish. Let me tell you all of it while I still can, while I still have time. His hands clenched around the empty glass. When I got to the clearing, I felt it immediately. That pull. So strong it was like gravity, like the tree was the center of the universe and I was falling toward it. But I fought it, gritted my teeth and forced myself to stay at the edge of the clearing, forced myself to remember why I was there. I raised the axe, put the blade against that black bark, and I struck. He poured another whiskey, his hands shaking so badly he spilled some on the desk. When the blade bit into the wood, the tree screamed. But the scream didn't come from the trunk. It came from below, from underground. A woman's voice, distant but clear, full of rage and pain and something like relief, as if part of her was glad to be woken up, glad to finally be noticed again after years of being forgotten. And it bled. Not sap, not normal tree sap anyway. This was black and thick, almost like tar, but warm. Hot, even. It ran down the trunk in streams, and where it touched the ground, the dirt hissed and steamed like acid was being poured on it. And the smell, God Miguel, the smell, like everything dead in the world had been liquefied and concentrated into that black ooze. Like death itself had become liquid. I should have run then, should have dropped the axe and fled and never looked back. But I heard voices. From underneath my feet, hundreds of voices, all whispering in a language I didn't understand but somehow knew was old. Older than Spanish, older than any language that should still be spoken. And one voice became clearer than the others. That woman's voice speaking Spanish, but ancient Spanish, the way they must have spoken it 500 years ago. She asked, "Who dares wake me, who disturbs my sleep, who strikes my wood?" My father's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I tried to run, tried to pull the axe free and get away, but I couldn't move. Roots had wrapped around my ankles while I stood there, had grown up through the ground and coiled around my legs without me noticing. And they were pulling me down. Not violently, slowly, deliberately, drawing me toward the base of the tree like a fisherman reeling in a catch. I fell, hit the ground hard, tried to kick the roots off, but they just got tighter. More roots came wrapping around my wrists, my arms, my waist. I thought I was certain that I was going to die right there, that the tree would pull me under and that would be the end, that you'd never know what happened to me, that you'd spend the rest of your life wondering if I'd abandoned you like your mother had. He paused, drinking again, needing the alcohol to continue. But then the pulling stopped. The roots held me in place but didn't pull me further down. And she spoke again. "You want to know?" she said. "You want to see what lies beneath my wood, what feeds my roots, what makes me grow so strong and so wrong? Very well, I will show you. I will show you everything." The ground underneath me began to soften, to liquefy. I sank into it like it was quicksand, but I wasn't sinking randomly. I was being guided, being drawn down into a hole that opened at the base of the tree, into darkness that smelled of earth and rot and centuries of decay. I clawed at the dirt, trying to stop my descent, trying to climb out. But the more I dug, the more dirt came loose, and I sank faster. And then my hands touched something solid, something that wasn't earth or stone, something that was bone. His voice cracked. "Human bones, Miguel, skeletons. Not just one, many. All tangled together, all wrapped in roots that had grown through their ribs and skulls and spines, connecting them, making them part of the tree's network. I could feel them in the darkness, could trace their shapes with my hands as I sank past them. Adults and children, men and women, old and young, all piled together in that hole under the tree, all feeding it with their remains. From the scraps of clothing still clinging to some of them, they were from different time periods. Some were very old, the cloth had completely rotted away, leaving just bones and roots. Others were newer. One still had, he stopped swallowing hard, still had dried flesh on the skull, skin like leather, hair still attached, eyes sunken but not completely gone. And in the center of all of them, at the very bottom, was her. He looked at me with eyes that had seen something that would haunt him forever, that would replay in his mind every night until the day he died, which I now realized wouldn't be long. "Her body isn't fully decomposed," he said slowly, carefully, as if describing a nightmare he was afraid might become more real if he spoke too quickly. The burial must have been wrong, somehow, too deep, wrong kind of soil, something that preserved her instead of letting her rot normally. The skin is still there, dried and black like leather, but intact. Stretched tight over the skull, you can see every contour of the bone beneath. Her hair is still there, too long, black, thick. But it's full of roots woven through it, small, black roots that have grown from her scalp, or maybe through her scalp from the outside, creating this web of hair and vegetation that spreads across the floor of that pit like a carpet. And her fingers, God, her fingers, they're so long, too long. The bones must have kept growing after death, or maybe they were always that long, I don't know. But they extend at least 18 inches thin as pencils, with black claws at the ends that she used to, he paused, that she must have used to claw at the earth above her when they buried her alive. You could see the marks on the underside of the wooden slats they'd laid over the pit before filling it with dirt. Scratches in the wood, deep scratches. She'd clawed until the wood splintered, until her fingernails tore off, until her fingers were just bloody bone. But by then she'd run out of air. But the worst part, Miguel, the worst part was her eyes. He finished the whiskey in one gulp, poured another immediately. When I first saw her in that darkness, her eyes were closed. And I thought, thank God, at least I don't have to see her looking at me. But then they opened, slowly, deliberately. And they weren't human eyes anymore. They were just holes, pits of absolute darkness, not empty, not nothing, but filled with something that moved, that writhed, that seemed to go down forever into places that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. And she smiled, lips pulled back over black teeth, over gums that had receded to show the roots of those teeth buried in her skull. And she smiled and she looked right at me with those impossible eyes and she laughed. That laugh, I hear it every night now, every time I close my eyes. That bubbling, wet laugh that sounded like it was coming from underwater, from underground, from some place where sound shouldn't be able to travel. She said, "You found me. After so many years in the darkness, someone finally found me. Do you know what they did to me, woodcutter? Do you know why I sleep beneath the earth?" I couldn't answer, couldn't move, could barely breathe in that pit that smelled like death and dirt and ancient rage. I could only listen as she told me her story. "My name was Izel," she said. "I came to this region in 1944, fleeing from the South where the government was killing people like me, people who practiced the old ways, who refused to modernize, who refused to forget the gods who came before the Spanish Christ. I was a curandera, a healer, a medicine woman. But I was also more. I could see things others couldn't, could speak to things others didn't believe in, could make things happen that shouldn't be possible. For 3 years the people here used me. They came in secret, ashamed to admit they needed my help, but desperate enough to seek it anyway. The wife who wanted her husband to stop beating her, the farmer whose crops were failing, the mother whose child was dying of fever, the old man who wanted his enemy to suffer. I helped them all, for a price. Always for a price, because power isn't free, woodcutter. Power always costs something. But then a child died. A boy 8 years old struck by lightning while playing in a field. His mother had come to me 2 weeks before asking me to curse her husband's mistress. I refused. I don't curse children, never children, but she thought I'd done it anyway. Thought the lightning was my doing. Thought I'd struck the wrong target. She told everyone. Others came forward, then people whose requests I'd refused or whose prices they'd thought too high. A man whose business had failed. A woman whose daughter had gone mad. A farmer whose cattle had died. All of them blaming me. All of them saying I was evil, was a witch, was working with the devil. 20 men came for me one night in July 1947. 20 men with torches and machetes and righteousness in their eyes. They dragged me from my house, bound my hands behind my back, took me deep into the forest where no one would hear, and they dug a hole. My father's voice was shaking now, tears streaming down his face. She described it, Miguel, every detail, how they made her kneel in the hole, how they laid wooden planks over it, how they started shoveling dirt on top while she screamed and begged and promised them anything if they'd stop. I clawed at the wood above me, she said, clawed until my fingernails tore off, until my fingers were just bone-scraping wood. I could hear them above me talking and laughing while they buried me, could hear them taking bets on how long I'd last. Could hear them planning what they'd tell people that I'd fled in the night run back south, disappeared, that no one should look for me because I was gone. But I didn't die quietly, woodcutter. As the dirt got heavier, as my lungs started to burn, as the darkness became total, I cursed them with everything I had left. Every breath I drew was a word of power. Every heartbeat was a promise of revenge, and with my last breath, with the last oxygen in my lungs, I made a deal with something older than the men who killed me, older than their God, older than their civilization. I offered myself, my body, my bones, my rage, my hatred, my need for vengeance that was so strong it kept my consciousness tethered to my corpse even after my heart stopped. I offered all of it to the earth itself, to the darkness, to the ancient things that sleep under the world. And they accepted. They always accept offerings made in dying breath. They always honor contracts signed in blood and terror. And so I became this, part of the earth, part of the darkness, neither dead nor alive, but something between. A tree grew from my grave, fed by my body, animated by my rage. A tree that would stand for generations waiting for someone to be curious enough to disturb it, to touch it, to take from it. Because every piece taken would give me the right to take a piece in return. Every branch broken would be a bone I could break. Every root severed would be a life I could sever. The old laws, the fair laws, the laws that existed before men made their own laws and pretended the old ones didn't matter. And now you've struck my wood with an axe, woodcutter. You've tried to destroy me, and that gives me the right to destroy you, not quickly, not mercifully, but slowly, the way I died, slowly suffocating, slowly losing pieces, slowly being consumed by darkness until there's nothing left but bones for my roots to grow through. My father's hands were clenched so tight around the glass that I thought it might shatter. Then she let me go. The roots released me. I climbed out of that pit, and when I looked back it had closed, like it had never been there. The ground was smooth, undisturbed, just bare dirt and the tree trunk. But I knew I was going to die, knew she'd mark me just like she marked all the others. And I knew that when I died she'd drag me back there, down into that pit, add me to her collection, let her roots grow through my bones just like she promised. He looked at me and I saw in his face the knowledge of his own death, the certainty of it, the acceptance of it. I've been feeling it for days now. Her fingers on my skin when I'm alone. Her breath on my neck when I'm trying to sleep. Her laugh in the wind. She's playing with me, Miguel, toying with me. Letting me know she's coming, letting me dread it, letting the anticipation be its own torture. Every night she comes to my room, stands at the foot of my bed, just watches. Sometimes she speaks, tells me what she's going to do to me, describes how it will feel when she pulls me under, how it will feel as her roots grow through my chest, through my skull, through every part of me, how I'll be conscious for all of it, aware for years or decades or centuries, trapped in darkness and earth and pain. I'll be dead within days, Miguel, maybe less. I can feel my heart getting weaker, can feel my lungs getting heavier, can feel the life being drawn out of me bit by bit. He grabbed my shoulders with both hands, gripping hard enough to hurt. But you listen to me. You listen very carefully. When I'm gone, you do not try to save me. You do not go to that tree. You do not try to dig me up or burn the tree down or any foolish thing a grieving son might think to do. You understand. But, Papa, promise me, his voice cracked. Promise me you'll stay away. Promise me you'll let me go, because if you come to that tree, she'll take you too, and I won't have that on my soul, won't have your death be my fault. Promise me, Miguel. Swear it on your mother's grave. I promise, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. I promise I'll stay away. Good, good. He pulled me into a hug, holding me tight, and I felt how thin he'd gotten, felt his ribs through his shirt, felt his heart beating too fast and too weak. You're a brave boy. You're going to be a brave man. You're going to survive this. How do I survive when she's marked me too? You survive by living, by refusing to give her what she wants, by growing up and moving away and building a life somewhere far from here, by having children and grandchildren and dying of old age in a comfortable bed surrounded by people who love you. That's how you win. By living despite her, by refusing to let fear control you, by being more than just her witness. That was 2 days ago, the last real conversation I ever had with my father. He died at 2:47 a.m. on July 3rd, 2004, and I was there when it happened, and I will carry the memory of it for the rest of my life. I was sleeping or trying to sleep in my room when I heard him screaming. Not words, just raw animal screaming, the sound of someone in such profound terror that language becomes impossible, that conscious thought evaporates, leaving only primal fear. I ran to his room. Sebastian got there first, was already trying to hold my father down as he thrashed on the bed like he was having a seizure. "She's here!" my father screamed. "Can't you see her right there in the corner? She's reaching for me." I looked where he was pointing, saw nothing but shadow in the corner of the room, just normal darkness where the lamplight didn't quite reach. But the shadow was wrong. Even I could see that. It was too thick, too solid, and it wasn't reacting to the lamplight the way shadows should. Sebastian moved the lamp, moved, the light shifted, but that shadow stayed exactly the same, unchanged, unmoved. "She says it's time," my father gasped, his eyes locked on that corner, seeing something we couldn't. "Says she's been patient enough. Says I've had my time to say goodbye. Says now I have to pay what I owe." "No!" I ran to the bed, grabbed his hand. It was ice cold, despite the warm night, despite the fever I could feel radiating from his chest. "You can't take him. He's my father. He's all I have left." For one moment, just one brief moment, his eyes focused on me, really saw me through whatever waking nightmare he was experiencing. "I love you, mijo. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from this. I'm sorry I broke my promise to Señora Valdez. I'm sorry I brought this down on all of us. But you—" His voice cracked. "You have to let me go. If you hold on, she'll take you too. You have to let me go." "I can't," I sobbed. "I can't lose you too. First Mama and now you. I can't." "You're stronger than you know," he whispered. His hand squeezed mine one last time, a grip that should have been weak but was desperate, full of love and fear and goodbye. "You're going to survive this. You're going to live. You're—" Then his body went rigid. His eyes widened impossibly, pupils dilating until they were just black holes taking over his eyes. And he was dragged. Invisible force yanked him sideways across the bed with such violence that I lost my grip on his hand, that Sebastian was thrown backward. My father hit the floor with a sound that made me flinch, a sound of bones hitting wood too hard, a sound that meant damage. And then the dragging began. He slid across the wooden floor toward that too dark corner, propelled by nothing we could see, pulled by invisible hands that left no marks, but moved with irresistible force. His own hands clawed at the floor, fingernails, leaving scratches in the wood, leaving splinters embedded in his fingers. He was trying to grab something, anything, trying to anchor himself, trying to resist. "Miguel," he screamed, his voice raw and breaking. "Don't forget me. Remember what I told you. Stay away from the—" The darkness swallowed him. One moment he was sliding across the floor, the next he was gone. Just vanished into that corner, as if the shadow was a doorway to somewhere else, as if the walls were permeable to whatever was taking him. His scream continued for 3 more seconds, muffled and distant, coming from somewhere far away, despite him having disappeared just feet from where we stood. And then it cut off abruptly with a sound like a door slamming, like a barrier falling into place. Silence. Sebastian and I stood frozen, staring at that corner. The shadow was just a shadow now. Normal darkness, nothing special about it. The corner was just a corner. Empty. Ordinary. My father was gone. Where? I couldn't form the words. Where did he go? Sebastian's face was white as paper, his hands trembling. To the tree. She took him to the tree, just like she promised she would. We searched until dawn. The house, the yard, the outbuildings, every inch of the ranch within running distance. No sign, no trace. My father had simply been erased from existence, pulled into some space between here and there, consumed by the darkness that lived beneath the cursed tree. At sunrise, Sebastian made the decision I couldn't make. We need to see. We need to know if he's there. I wanted to refuse, wanted to run the other direction, but I needed to know too, needed to see if my father was truly gone or if some part of him remained that I could save. We walked into the forest, following the path one last time. The morning light barely penetrated the canopy. The shadows were thick and deep and seemed to reach toward us as we passed, seemed to whisper congratulations, seemed to know we were walking directly into her trap, but couldn't stop ourselves because grief makes you stupid and love makes you blind. When we reached the clearing, the tree stood exactly as before. The figures around it had increased, now 11 of them, including the 4 who touched it yesterday. All in various stages of transformation, all breathing in that slow rhythm synchronized with the roots. But at the base of the trunk, the earth had been disturbed. Fresh, dark soil recently turned, and protruding from that soil as if it had been placed there deliberately, as if she wanted me to see, was a hand. My father's hand. I recognized it immediately, the scar on the knuckle from when he'd caught it in a fence wire when I was 5. The calluses from years of ranch work. The wedding ring he'd never removed after my mother died, the gold band worn thin but still present. "Papa!" I ran forward before Sebastian could stop me. I dropped to my knees beside the hand, grabbed it with both of mine. "I'll pull you out. Hold on." The fingers moved, curling around my wrists with crushing strength that didn't match the dead appearance of the hand. And from the earth, from underground, from somewhere deep below where I knelt, I heard his voice. "Miguel, run. It's a trap. She's using me as bait she wants." The hand released me suddenly and sank back into the soil, pulling down and disappearing, as if the earth had turned liquid for a moment. I clawed at the dirt, trying to follow it, trying to dig him out, my hands moving frantically, scooping dirt, finding nothing but more dirt beneath. "He's down there," I sobbed, my hands bleeding from splinters and rocks. "Under the tree, still alive somehow, still conscious. We have to get him out." "We have to." "We can't," Sebastian said gently, pulling me back, holding me as I fought against him. "Miguel, listen to me. That wasn't him anymore, not really. She's already taken him, already incorporated him. What you saw was just remains, a last bit of connection before he becomes part of her completely. No, he's alive. He called my name. He warned me. And that proves he's still your father, still loves you enough to warn you even from beyond death. But he's gone, Miguel. And if we stay here, if we try to dig him up, she'll take us too. Is that what your father would want? For you to die here trying to save him when he's already lost?" I collapsed against Sebastian, sobbing my whole body, shaking with grief and rage and helplessness. Behind us I heard movement. Turned to see the transformed figures advancing, shambling, closer arms, raised mouths open. And behind them, standing at the forest edge, was her. 7 feet tall and impossibly thin gray skin and black hair full of roots, those empty eye sockets tracking our movement with malicious intelligence. She raised one long-fingered hand and beckoned us closer, smiled that impossible smile, and spoke in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "5 remain, but not for long. The boy is mine, has always been mine. The others will join my garden. All of you will feed my roots. All of you will help me grow stronger. And one day soon, I will have enough bodies, enough power, enough rage, and then I'll walk beyond these trees. I'll visit the town that killed me. I'll collect what I'm owed from the descendants of the men who buried me. I'll make them understand what it feels like to suffocate in darkness, to be forgotten, to be buried alive with no hope of rescue." Sebastian pulled me to my feet. "Run, now, don't look back." We ran. And this time I didn't look back, didn't want to see her following. Didn't want to know how close she was. Just ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out and we burst from the forest into daylight that should have felt safe but didn't. Because I knew she was right. 5 of us remained, and one by one she would take us all, unless we could find a way to stop her. The police came 3 days later, summoned by neighbors who'd heard nothing from the ranch, who'd noticed that no one had come to town for supplies, that the usual sounds and activity had ceased completely. They found Sebastian and me sitting on the front porch of the main house staring at nothing. Diego and Mateo were gone, had walked into the forest that morning without a word, answering the call that had finally become too strong to resist. We'd watched them go, made no attempt to stop them because we both knew it was pointless. The tree would take what it wanted. Resistance only prolonged the inevitable. We were the last 2, an old man and a traumatized boy. The sole survivors of something the police would never understand, never believe, never be able to fight. "Where is everyone?" the officer asked, looking around at the abandoned ranch, at the buildings with doors standing open at the cattle that had broken through fences and scattered at the chickens that roamed free without anyone to collect their eggs. "Gone," Sebastian said simply. "All gone, dead or worse than dead." "And Don Rodrigo, where's the patron?" "The forest took him 3 nights ago, pulled him right out of his bed and dragged him into darkness. He's under the tree now, part of her collection." The officer exchanged glances with his partner. "Senor, are you feeling well? Have you been drinking, using drugs? Because what you're saying doesn't make sense." "It doesn't have to make sense. It just has to be true." Sebastian stood slowly moving like a man who'd aged decades in days. "There's a tree in the center of the northern forest. Black bark doesn't follow normal biology, kills everyone who touches it. 13 men are dead or transformed because of it. Maybe more if you count the ones who were there before we arrived. And it won't stop. It can't stop. It's hungry, and it's been patient, and now it's awake. Sir, I'm going to need you to calm down and speak rationally. Check the forest yourself if you don't believe me. But I'm warning you, don't touch that tree. Don't even get close. And for the love of God, don't let your curiosity make you reach out and put your hand on that bark. Because if you do, you'll end up like all the others, screaming and dying and becoming part of something that should never have existed." They didn't believe him, of course. Why would they? Normal people don't believe in curses and witches and trees that consume souls. Normal people explain away the impossible, find rational reasons for irrational events, refuse to see what their worldview doesn't allow for. But they investigated anyway. That was their job. 3 officers went into the forest to check the tree Sebastian had described. 2 came back. The third, a young man named Carlos, only 24 years old, who'd just become a father for the first time, touched the bark despite his partner's warnings. They said he was entranced, that he walked up to the tree like he was sleepwalking, that he smiled as he placed both hands on that black bark. He's in an institution now, has been for 20 years, hasn't spoken a word since they pulled him away from the tree. Just sits and stares at walls, occasionally making gestures, like he's pushing something away, like he's fighting off invisible hands that are trying to pull him under. After that, the authorities sealed off the ranch, declared it government property too dangerous for habitation, built a fence, posted warnings, made trespassing a serious crime with jail time attached. It didn't stop everyone. Thrill seekers still came over the years, ignoring the warnings, climbing the fence, walking into the forest to see the legendary cursed tree. Some touched it. Most of those died within weeks, always with the same symptoms: black veins, mysterious scratches, visions of a gray woman with empty eyes. A few survived, like that young officer. Changed, broken, empty shells who'd had something vital stolen from them, who'd given up a piece of their soul to something that collected souls like other people collected stamps. I lived with Senora Valdez after that. She took me in without question, gave me a room, enrolled me in school in town. The other kids avoided me. I was the boy from the cursed ranch, the one whose father had died mysteriously, the one who'd seen things no child should see. That was fine. I didn't want friends anyway. At night I still heard her sometimes. Whispers through the darkness, laughter when I was alone. That smell of sweet rot when I walked past dark alleys or empty buildings. She was keeping her promise, reminding me she was still there, still waiting, still watching. 3 months later, Carlos approached me at school. Not the officer, a different Carlos, a 15-year-old from the grade above mine full of teenage bravado and that dangerous mix of curiosity and immortality complex that makes young people do stupid things. "Is it true," he asked during lunch, sitting down across from me without invitation, "about your dad's ranch, about the ghost tree?" "Stay away from there," I said flatly, not looking up from my food. "Just stay away." "But is it real? My older brother says it's just stories. Says there's no such thing as cursed trees or vengeful spirits." I looked at him then, really looked at him. Saw that mix of skepticism and excitement, that teenage certainty that bad things happen to other people, never to you, that you were special and different and somehow immune to the rules that governed everyone else. "It's real," I said quietly. "More real than anything else in this world. And if you go there, you'll die. Maybe not right away. Maybe it'll take days or weeks. But you'll die, and it'll be the worst death you can imagine. You'll see things that'll break your mind. You'll feel things that'll make you wish you could die faster just to make it stop. You'll understand what it means to be truly helpless, truly doomed, truly forsaken by every god and every law of nature." Something in my voice must have gotten through because his cocky expression faltered. "You're just trying to scare me." "Yes, because you should be scared. Because what's in that forest doesn't care how brave you think you are, doesn't care that you have your whole life ahead of you, doesn't care about your dreams or your family or anything that makes you human. It just takes and takes and takes, and there's nothing you can do to stop it except stay away." But he went anyway. They always do. 2 weeks later, on a dare, with friends watching, he climbed the fence and walked into the forest, found the tree, took out his phone to photograph it. They found him 3 days later wandering the highway 20 miles from the ranch. When police tried to talk to him, he just screamed. Screamed and screamed until his voice gave out, then continued screaming silently, mouth open, eyes wide, seeing something no one else could see. He's still in the institution, in the same facility as the officer. Sometimes they put them in the same day room, the two men who touched the tree and survived. They don't interact, don't acknowledge each other. Just sit and stare at nothing, trapped in whatever hell she showed them, whatever corner of her darkness she let them glimpse before releasing them back to the world as living warnings. I tried to move on, tried to build a normal life. Moved to Mexico City when I was 22. Got a job in an office processing insurance claims, doing work that was boring and safe and as far from ranch life and cursed forests as I could get. Met a girl named Sophia at a coffee shop. She had kind eyes and a laugh that sounded like hope, like maybe happiness was still possible despite everything I'd seen. We dated, fell in love, got married when I was 25, had a son we named Rodrigo after my father, hoping that giving the name to new life might somehow redeem it, might erase the taint of how the original Rodrigo had died. For a few years I almost forgot. Almost convinced myself it had been trauma and grief and a 12-year-old's imagination turning tragedy into supernatural horror. Almost believed the therapist who said it was PTSD, that the human mind creates elaborate fantasies to process overwhelming loss, that with enough time and medication and talk therapy, I could be normal again. But on our wedding night, as Sophia slept beside me in our hotel room, exhausted and happy and dreaming of our future together, I smelled it. That sweet, rotten smell, like flowers blooming on corpses. And in the mirror across from the bed, I saw her, standing in the corner behind me, 7 feet tall and impossibly thin, gray skin and hair full of roots, empty eye sockets tracking my reflection, that impossible smile showing black teeth. "Leave me alone," I whispered, careful not to wake Sophia. "Never," Her voice echoed in my head, not through my ears, but directly into my brain, bypassing sound entirely. We're bound forever now, you and I, witness and witch, prophet and curse. I am in you and you are in me, and nothing will ever change that. Not distance, not time. Not love or hope or prayer. You are mine until the last breath leaves your body, and perhaps even after that. She faded, but the smell lingered for hours. That was the pattern for the next 7 years. I'd go weeks or months without seeing her, almost believing I'd imagined it, almost convincing myself I was free. Then she'd appear in a mirror, in a shadow in the corner of my vision. A reminder, a promise, a threat. The nightmares got worse. Every night I dreamed of being buried alive, of dirt in my mouth, of roots growing through my chest, of darkness, pressing down until I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, couldn't do anything but suffer in silence forever. I'd wake up gasping, covered in sweat, feeling phantom fingers around my throat. Sophia begged me to see doctors. I did. They prescribed pills for anxiety, for depression, for PTSD, for insomnia. None of them worked. How do you medicate away something that's real? How do you therapy your way out of a genuine supernatural curse? When Rodrigo was born, I felt hope for the first time in years. This tiny, perfect human who didn't know about curses or witches or trees that consumed souls, who lived in a world where the worst things were dirty diapers and missed naps and the terrible twos. I wanted to preserve that innocence forever, wanted to protect him from ever knowing what I knew. But on Rodrigo's first birthday, I found something in his crib when I went to check on him in the morning. A single black leaf. Exactly like the leaves from that tree. It shouldn't have been possible. We lived in Mexico City, hundreds of miles from the ranch. Our apartment was on the 4th floor. The windows had been closed and locked all night. But there it was, placed carefully on his pillow next to his sleeping face. The message was clear: she could reach anyone, anywhere. No distance was safe. No lock could keep her out, and now she knew about my son. On my 30th birthday, I received a letter. No return address. No stamp. It had been placed directly in our mailbox, bypassing the postal system entirely. Inside, written in old-fashioned script with ink that looked disturbingly like dried blood. It's been 18 years, Miguel. Long enough to forget, long enough to doubt, long enough to wonder if it was real or just a child's nightmare. But you know the truth, don't you? You've always known. Come back. Come see if I'm still here. Come see what I've been building with all the bones you left me. Come see your father. He misses you. He's been asking for you every day for 18 years, screaming your name into the darkness, begging you to come save him, even though he knows you can't. Come see, come witness, come fulfill your purpose. My hands shook holding that letter. Sophia found me sitting at the kitchen table, staring at it, tears running down my face. "What is that?" she asked. "Nothing, junk mail." But she knew I was lying. Had known for years that something was wrong with me, something deeper than PTSD or depression or any diagnosis the doctors could give. That night I made a decision. I would go back. Not because she commanded it, not because I couldn't resist, but because I needed to end this. Needed to face her one final time. Needed to prove to myself that I was more than just her witness, more than just the boy who'd survived by running away. I needed to prove I could stand before her and say no, and mean it, and live. I told Sophia I had business in Chihuahua. She didn't believe me, but she didn't stop me either. Maybe she knew this was something I had to do. Maybe she was just tired of living with a ghost of a husband, someone who was physically present but mentally always somewhere else, always looking over his shoulder, always waiting for something terrible to happen. The drive took 8 hours. 8 hours to remember, to prepare, to wonder if this was the stupidest thing I'd ever done or the bravest. Probably both. I arrived at the ranch at sunset. The fence was rusted now, signs faded but still readable. Danger, no trespassing, property of the state of Chihuahua. But there were no guards, no one to stop me. The government had given up trying to prevent people from entering years ago. Too expensive, too pointless. People who wanted to go would go, and people with sense would stay away. I parked at the old gate and walked up the dirt road to the main house. It was still standing barely. Windows broken, roof sagging, nature reclaiming it slowly, patiently. 20 years of neglect had turned my childhood home into a ruin, a monument to failure, a testament to what happens when you disturb what should remain buried. But the forest looked exactly the same. Dark, dense, waiting. As if time didn't touch it. As if it existed outside the normal flow of cause and effect, eternal and unchanging and patient. I stood at the edge of the trees as the sun set, painting the sky blood red, and I felt it, that pull, that call, stronger than ever, amplified by 2 decades of waiting, of wanting, of growing power with each soul consumed. "I'm here," I said to the darkening woods, "just like you wanted, so come on, let's finish this." For a long moment, nothing. Just wind through leaves, just the sound of my own heartbeat, just the weight of growing darkness. And then I heard it, from deep in the forest, from the direction where I knew the tree stood, laughter, her laughter, delighted and victorious and centuries old. "Welcome home, Miguel. I've been waiting so long. Come see what I've made. Come see what I've become. Come see your father." I took a step forward, then another, walking into the forest, walking toward the tree. Walking toward whatever end awaited me there. Behind me the sun set completely. Darkness fell like a curtain, and I was alone in the woods with something that had been hungry for 20 years. This was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I'd ever done. I suspected it was both. But I kept walking anyway because this was my choice, my decision, my life to risk or save as I saw fit. And that choosing was the one thing she could never take from me. 20 minutes of walking brought me to the clearing. The tree stood exactly as I remembered. Black bark, motionless leaves, breathing roots. But the garden had grown. 13 figures now circled the tree. Some I recognized, even transformed Diego Lucas, the others from that terrible summer. Others were newer people I didn't know, thrill seekers and curiosity seekers who'd come over the years and paid the ultimate price. "Do you like it?" Her voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "My collection, my family, everyone who thought they were special, thought they were different, thought they could resist or escape or somehow be the exception. All of them feeding my roots now, all of them part of me forever." "Where's my father?" I asked, proud that my voice didn't shake. "Here, always here. Would you like to see him?" "Touch the tree, Miguel. Place your hand on my bark and I'll show you everything. Show you where he is, how he suffers, how he's been screaming your name for 20 years, hoping you'd come save him." I stepped closer. The pull was overwhelming, like gravity, like magnetism, like every cell in my body wanted to make contact, needed to understand, craved to become part of something larger than itself. My hand was inches from the bark. I could feel heat radiating from it, could smell that sweet rot stronger than ever, could hear whispers from underground, dozens of voices all calling my name. "That's it," she whispered. "So close now, just one touch, just one moment of contact, and then you'll understand everything. You'll see, you'll know, you'll finally be complete." I stopped. "No," I said. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in 2 seconds. "What?" I said no. I came here to face you, to prove to myself you were real, to stop running. But I'm not giving you what you want. I'm not touching your tree." She materialized in front of me, fully visible, fully present, more terrible than memory. "You will. You have no choice. I've been calling you for 20 years. You came because I summoned you. You're here because I willed it. You're mine, Miguel. You've always been mine. You called. I came. But the choice to touch or not, that's mine. And I choose not to. You think you can resist?" Her voice filled the clearing, filled the forest, filled the air itself. "I am patient. I am eternal. I can wait hours or days or years. Eventually you'll weaken. Eventually you'll give in. Everyone does. Maybe, but not today. I looked directly into those empty eye sockets, into the writhing darkness within. You said it yourself, I'm your witness, the one who tells your story. If you take me now, who's left to spread your legend, who's left to make sure you're feared and remembered? She tilted her head, studying me. Clever, using my own words against me. But tell me, little witness, how long can you resist? I'm in every shadow you see, every nightmare you have, every moment you're alone. How long before that breaks you? How long before you come back here and beg me to end it? I don't know, maybe forever, maybe tomorrow, but right now, in this moment, I'm choosing to walk away. I'm choosing to live, and that choice is mine, not yours. I turned my back on her, on the tree, on my father, buried beneath it, on all the souls trapped in those roots, on everything that had haunted me for 2 decades. "You'll regret this!" she shrieked. The trees shook, the ground trembled. "I'll make you regret this. I'll take everyone you love, your wife, your son, everyone." "You'll try," I said over my shoulder. "You've been trying for 20 years, but you haven't succeeded yet. And I'm going to keep choosing to resist, keep choosing to live, keep choosing to be more than just your witness." I walked, put one foot in front of the other. The forest erupted around me, branches reaching roots, bursting from the ground, shadows grasping. But I kept walking. Her fingers closed on my shoulder, those impossibly long fingers with curved claws. I felt them pierce my shirt, felt the tips press against my skin, hard enough to hurt. "You are mine," she hissed directly into my ear, her breath cold as graves. "No," I said. "I'm mine, and you don't get to take that." I pulled free, kept walking. Behind me, her scream of rage echoed through the forest, a sound of pure, frustrated fury from something that had been denied what it wanted, what it had waited decades to claim. I reached the forest edge, crossed back into the grassland, into the open air where moonlight fell. I didn't run, walked with deliberate steps, with dignity, with choice. When I reached my car, I looked back once. She stood at the tree line, watching. Behind her, the 13 figures from her garden had shambled to the forest edge, watching too. All of them motionless, all of them waiting, and I realized she'd let me go. Could have taken me at any moment, but chose not to, because she knew the truth, the torture of living with this knowledge, of carrying this curse of never being free, even when physically distant, was worse than death, was its own kind of hell, was exactly what she wanted. I got in my car, started the engine, drove away. In the rearview mirror, she grew smaller, but she never disappeared, never looked away, just watched me go with that terrible smile. That was 2 years ago. I'm 32 now. I've learned to live with it, learned to function despite knowing she's always there, just out of sight, waiting for my resolve to crack, for my fear to overcome my will, for the curse to finally claim me. Sophia knows everything now. I told her the whole truth. Part of me expected her to leave, to take Rodrigo and run from the cursed man I'd become. But she stayed. "We'll deal with it," she said. "Together." And we have. Sort of. I still see her sometimes, in mirrors and shadows, in the corner of the room when I'm falling asleep. But she doesn't speak anymore. Doesn't threaten. Just watches. Waiting. 3 days ago, I received another letter. Same handwriting, same lack of postage. "Your son looks like your father. Same eyes, same smile. I wonder if he has the sight too. Shall we find out?" I burned the letter, but the threat was clear. The curse doesn't end with me. It never ends. It just finds new generations to feed on new souls, to collect new ways to spread fear and suffering through bloodlines. So I'm writing this down, all of it, every detail, and I'm putting it somewhere public where anyone can read it. Not to make her famous, to warn. If you ever hear about a ranch in northern Chihuahua, if someone dares you to see the cursed tree, if curiosity makes you think you'll be different, special, immune, don't go, don't touch it, don't go near it, don't even think about it. Because she's real. The curse is real, and once you're marked, you're never truly free. I'm living proof. Tonight, as I finish writing this, it's 11:47 p.m., October 31st, 2024. 20 years to the day since that summer started, since my father broke his promise, since the tree woke up, since everything fell apart, and I can smell it. That sweet, rotten smell. She's in the room, right now, behind me. I can feel her breath on my neck, cold as the grave she climbed out of, but I'm not turning around. I'm not giving her the satisfaction. I'm not feeding her hunger for fear. I'm hitting publish, sending this into the world. And then I'm going to close my laptop, kiss my wife goodnight, check on my son sleeping peacefully in his room, and go to bed. Because that's what you do when you're cursed. You live anyway. You fight for every normal moment. You choose life over fear. You choose resistance over surrender. Will she take me eventually? Probably. The curse always collects in the end. Will she hurt the people I love? She'll try. She's already trying. But until that day comes, I choose to resist, choose to live, choose to be more than just her witness. So if you're reading this, learn from my family's mistakes. Learn from the 13 men who died. Learn from the boy who barely survived. Some places are cursed for a reason. Some dead should stay buried. And some trees should never ever be touched. The ranch still stands. The forest still grows. The tree still waits. And she's still there, under the roots, in the darkness, patient as only the dead can be patient, waiting for the next fool who thinks they're different, the next fool who thinks they're special, the next fool who thinks the curse won't take them too. Don't be that fool. Just stay away. Stay far, far away. I just felt her breath on the back of my neck, cold as winter graves. She's leaning close now, so close I can hear her whisper directly into my ear. Good boy, tell them all. Spread my story. Make them fear me. Make them curious. Make them wonder. Some will heed your warning, but some won't. And those? Her laugh is barely audible, but it fills my head with ice. Those will come. They always come. And I'll be waiting. She's right. She knows something I've been trying not to admit. Eventually, they all come back. And when my son is old enough to ask about his grandfather, when he wants to see where I grew up, when he insists on visiting, despite my warnings, because teenage boys never believe their fathers, I'll have to choose. Tell him the truth and risk him not believing, risk him going to prove me wrong. Or keep silent and pray he never goes looking. She knows. She's always known. The curse doesn't end with me. It never ends. And that's the most terrifying thing of all. But tonight I sleep. I choose to sleep. I choose to pretend tomorrow will be different. Even though I know deep down that one day, maybe in a week, maybe in a year, maybe in a decade, I'll wake up at 3:17 a.m. and know I have to go back. Just once more. Just to see. Just to make sure. And when that day comes, I don't know if I'll have the strength to say no again, but tonight I sleep. Upload timestamp October 31st, 2024, 11:58 p.m. Note found on Miguel Hernandez's computer by police January 15, 2025, following reports of his disappearance. Subject's wife reports he left the house on the night of November 19, 2024, stating he had to check something. His car was found abandoned at the gates of former Rancho Los Álamos property. No body has been recovered. Case remains open. Addendum subject's son, Rodrigo Hernandez, age 7, has begun drawing pictures of a black tree with people trapped in its roots. When asked why, he says, "Grandpa told me. He visits my room at night and tells me about the tree. He says it's beautiful. He says I should go see it. Social services has been contacted."